January 31st, 1968, 3:40 in the morning. The ancient imperial city of Hue sleeps under a moonless sky. Families huddle in their homes, celebrating Tet, the Vietnamese Lunar New Year. Lanterns hang from doorways. Golden apricot blossoms line the streets. For the citizens of this cultural treasure, this historic capital of Vietnam, the war has always seemed distant, something happening somewhere else, to someone else. In exactly 3 minutes, that illusion will be shattered forever. At precisely 3:43 a.m., the night sky over Hue erupts in fire. 122mm rockets scream overhead, their trails of flame arcing across the darkness like falling stars. The sound is deafening, the impact catastrophic. This is the signal. The attack has begun. Make sure you subscribe to our channel to discover more untold stories from history. Within minutes, 10,000 North Vietnamese army soldiers and Viet Cong guerrillas will pour into this city from 3 directions. They will raise their flag over the ancient Citadel. They will hold this city for 26 days. And before it ends, the Battle of Hue will become the longest, bloodiest, most devastating urban combat of the entire Vietnam War. This is the story of how a small force of United States Marines, outnumbered 10-1, fought house by house, room by room, to reclaim a city. This is the story of courage under fire. This is the story of tactical innovation born from desperation. This is the story of the civilians caught in the crossfire and the thousands who would never escape. This is the story of a battle that changed the course of the Vietnam War and shocked the American public into confronting the brutal reality of this conflict. This is the Battle of Hue. To understand what happened at Hue, you must first understand what Hue was, what it meant, what it represented. Because this was not just another city. This was Vietnam's soul. For 143 years, from 1802 until 1945, Hue served as the imperial capital of Vietnam. This is where the emperors of the Nguyen dynasty ruled. This is where the elaborate court ceremonies took place. This is where Vietnamese culture, art, and tradition reached their highest expression. The palaces, the gardens, the temples, the tombs of the emperors lining the Perfume River. All of it spoke to a glorious past, a civilization that stretched back thousands of years. The city sits roughly in the center of Vietnam, about 50 miles south of the demilitarized zone that separates north and south. It straddles the Perfume River, called Song Hoang by the Vietnamese, a name that comes from the fragrant flowers that fall from trees along its banks. The river flows west to east, emptying into the South China Sea about 8 miles downstream. This river divides Hue into 2 distinct worlds. North of the Perfume River rises the Citadel. And when I say Citadel, I mean a genuine medieval fortress, a massive military installation that would not look out of place in Europe 500 years ago. Picture this: walls 30 feet high. Not stone, but compressed earth and stone, making them nearly indestructible. These walls measure up to 90 feet thick at their base. 90 feet. You could drive 3 city buses side by side through these walls and still have room left over. They form a square approximately 2 miles per side, enclosing roughly 3 square miles of territory. A moat surrounds the entire citadel, 90 feet wide and 12 feet deep, fed by the Perfume River through a system of sluice gates that can be opened or closed. 11 fortified gates penetrate these walls, each one a defensive strongpoint in itself. The walls are honeycombed with tunnels, bunkers, and fighting positions, some dating back to the original construction in 1804, others added by the Japanese during World War II when they occupied Vietnam. Inside the citadel sits the Imperial City, a smaller walled compound measuring roughly 600 yards on each side. Its walls stand 20 feet high, and inside the Imperial City is the Purple Forbidden City, the innermost sanctum where the emperor and his family lived, off limits to all but the royal household and the highest court officials. But the Citadel is not just a historical monument. In 1968, it serves as the headquarters of the 1st ARVN Division, the Army of the Republic of Vietnam's finest combat unit. General Ngo Quang Truong, widely considered the most capable officer in the entire South Vietnamese military, commands from here. Tay Loc Airfield sits inside the Citadel's walls. Military barracks, supply depots, communications facilities, all protected by those ancient walls. South of the Perfume River lies what locals call the New City. Here you find wide, tree-lined boulevards built by the French during their colonial rule. Government office buildings constructed of concrete and steel. Hue University, one of Vietnam's finest educational institutions. The provincial hospital, the National Police Headquarters, the Thua Thien Provincial Government Complex, and crucially, the MACV Compound, Military Assistance Command Vietnam, a former hotel that now houses about 200 American and Australian military advisors who are training and supporting South Vietnamese forces. The new city feels modern, almost European in places, with its orderly grid of streets, its parks, its contemporary architecture. The Citadel feels ancient, mysterious, a place where history whispers from every corner. Together, they create a city unlike any other in Vietnam. In 1968, Hue is home to approximately 140,000 people. It is the third largest city in South Vietnam, after Saigon and Da Nang, but its importance far exceeds its size. This is the cultural capital, the intellectual center, the spiritual heart of Vietnam. Some of the country's finest schools are here. Buddhist monasteries and Catholic churches stand side by side. The tombs of the emperors, elaborate complexes of temples and gardens, line the river outside the city walls. Hue has, until now, been largely spared from the war. There have been some rocket attacks, some minor incidents, but nothing like the devastating battles in other parts of the country. For the most part, life continues almost normally here. Students attend classes, merchants sell their goods in the markets, families celebrate holidays. South Vietnamese officers reportedly pay bribes to be stationed in Hue because it is so peaceful, so safe, so removed from the fighting. This relative peace is about to end in the most violent way imaginable. Let me take you back 1 year to early 1967 and show you how this battle was born. Because what happened at Hue did not happen by accident. It was planned, meticulously, brilliantly, months in advance. The leadership of North Vietnam is debating strategy. The war is not going well from their perspective. American forces are growing stronger. Search and destroy operations are inflicting heavy casualties. The Ho Chi Minh Trail supply route is under constant aerial bombardment. Meanwhile, the South Vietnamese government, though corrupt and unpopular in many areas, is not collapsing as predicted. General Vo Nguyen Giap, the legendary victor of Dien Bien Phu, who defeated the French in 1954, is pushing for a new approach. Not a series of small guerrilla actions scattered across the countryside, but a massive, coordinated offensive, a general offensive, an offensive so shocking, so overwhelming, that it will trigger a spontaneous uprising by the South Vietnamese people against their government. An offensive that will prove to the American public that this war cannot be won. An offensive that will bring the Americans to the negotiating table, ready to accept defeat. Planning begins in earnest. The communist leadership creates what they call Resolution 14, finalized at the 14th plenary session of the Central Committee in January 1968. The objective is clear: launch simultaneous attacks against 36 of 44 provincial capitals, 5 of 6 autonomous cities, 64 district capitals, and 50 hamlets. Bring the war to the cities. Show the Americans and the South Vietnamese government that nowhere is safe. But among all these targets, Hue holds special significance. Capturing Hue would be more than a military victory. It would be a psychological earthquake. Imagine the propaganda value of raising the communist flag over the ancient imperial capital. Imagine the blow to South Vietnamese morale. Imagine the message it would send to the world. We can take and hold the very heart of Vietnamese culture. The attack on Hue is given its own designation within the larger offensive. They call it the Hue City Front. A special command structure is established under General Tran Van Quang, commander of the Tri Thien Hue military region. Planning is so important that a 3-story underground bunker headquarters is constructed at Thon La Chu village, about 3 miles west of Hue. And here is a detail that shows you how deeply the communist infrastructure has penetrated South Vietnamese society. This bunker is built by a South Vietnamese official, supposedly as a bomb shelter, who is secretly working for the North. The planners divide Hue into 4 tactical zones and identify 196 specific targets: government buildings, military installations, police stations, radio stations, power plants, communication centers, the homes of specific officials. Everything is mapped, everything is photographed. Communist agents who have been living in Hue for years provide detailed intelligence, street layouts, guard schedules, weak points in defensive positions, the location of ammunition stores, escape routes, safe houses. The communists know more about Hue than many of the people who live there. Training begins months before the attack. North Vietnamese army units, the regulars, practice urban warfare tactics, house-to-house fighting, room clearing, street fighting, how to fortify buildings, how to use the urban terrain for defense. These are not guerrillas hiding in the jungle. These are well-trained, well-equipped soldiers preparing for conventional urban combat. The forces assigned to capture Hue are substantial. The 6th NVA Regiment will attack the Citadel from the west. The 4th NVA Regiment will strike the new city south of the river. The 5th NVA Regiment will establish blocking positions northwest of Hue to prevent reinforcements from reaching the city. Supporting them are multiple sapper battalions, elite engineer units trained in demolitions and infiltration, and local Viet Cong guerrilla units who know every alley and side street. All told, the initial assault force numbers over 5,000 men. As the battle develops, reinforcements will bring this number to between 8,000 and 12,000. These are not ragtag insurgents. These are combat veterans, many of whom fought the French. They carry modern weapons, AK-47 assault rifles, which are more reliable than the American M16s, B-40 rocket-propelled grenade launchers, which can destroy vehicles and punch through walls, heavy machine guns, mortars, recoilless rifles, satchel charges. They have ammunition for weeks of fighting. They have food stocks. They have medical supplies. They are coming to stay. But here is what makes the planning truly sinister. They also have lists of names, thousands of names. Government officials, military officers, national police, teachers at the university, Catholic priests, anyone who worked with Americans, anyone who supported the South Vietnamese government, anyone deemed a threat to communist control. These lists have been compiled over months, even years, by communist agents living in Hue. The lists are divided by neighborhood, by occupation, by level of threat, and each name has an assessment: arrest, re-educate, or eliminate. The implications of these lists will only become clear later, when the mass graves are discovered. Now, let me tell you about the supply operation, because it rivals any military logistics effort in history. Over the last 6 months of 1967, 81,000 tons of supplies have moved south along the Ho Chi Minh Trail. Weapons, ammunition, rice, medicine, all of it flowing toward staging areas in the mountains west of Hue. 200,000 troops have infiltrated into South Vietnam by January 1968. This is not a raid, this is an invasion. In Hue itself, weapons are being smuggled into the city in false-bottom junks on the Perfume River. They are hidden in Tet gift packages, they are buried in gardens, they are concealed in Buddhist temples by sympathetic monks. Viet Cong guerrillas are arriving in the city by ones and twos, mingling with the thousands of pilgrims and visitors coming for the Tet holiday. By January 30th, hundreds of guerrillas are in position throughout Hue, weapons cached and waiting for the signal. The date is chosen carefully. January 31st, the first day of Tet. This is Vietnam's most important holiday, equivalent to Christmas, New Year, and Thanksgiving combined. It is a time when families gather, a time of celebration, a time when everyone, including soldiers, takes leave to visit home. A truce has been announced, 7 days of ceasefire to honor the holiday. The South Vietnamese have agreed to 36 hours. This means that on the night of January 30th, half the South Vietnamese army is on leave. Officers are with their families, units are under strength, guards are relaxed, commanders are at home. It is the perfect moment to strike. Weather is also a factor, and this shows the sophistication of the planning. Late January and early February bring the northeast monsoon season to central Vietnam. Low clouds, heavy rain, poor visibility. This is crucial because American air power is the one thing the North Vietnamese fear most. Clouds below 300 feet make it almost impossible for aircraft to provide close air support. The planners know this. They are counting on it. They are betting that American bombs and napalm, which have been so devastating in the jungle, will be grounded when they are needed most. Now, you might be wondering, did the Americans have any warning? Did they see this coming? The answer is complicated, and it reveals one of the great intelligence failures of the war. There were signs. Oh yes, there were signs. On January 21st, the siege of Khe Sanh began. 20,000 North Vietnamese troops surrounded a Marine combat base near the DMZ. General Westmoreland became convinced this was the main attack, a repeat of Dien Bien Phu. He shifted resources, moved units, focused intelligence assets on Khe Sanh. In retrospect, we now know Khe Sanh was a feint, a diversion, designed to pull American attention away from the cities, and it worked. Intelligence reports did note the presence of the 4th and 6th NVA regiments in the area around Hue. The 4th was spotted about 10 kilometers south. The 6th was known to be about 20 kilometers north, but these units were a day's march away. No one believed they would attack a major city. The conventional wisdom said the communists could not take and hold urban areas. They were guerrillas, jungle fighters. Cities were where the Americans and ARVN had the advantage with their tanks, artillery, and air power. So even though the enemy was nearby, no one really believed Hue was in danger. The 5th NVA regiment, hiding in the mountains west of Hue, was not detected at all. This is a failure of intelligence gathering. An entire regiment, thousands of men, went unnoticed. There were tactical warnings as well. On the evening of January 30th, ARVN Regional Force soldiers spotted enemy figures moving past their positions and opened fire. Flares were shot into the sky. A reconnaissance patrol on the Perfume River reported seeing a long column of NVA soldiers marching toward the city. An observation aircraft was dispatched, but reported nothing unusual. On January 29th, aircraft spotted NVA units crossing a river north of Hue. Artillery fired. Airstrikes were called in. But crucially, no ground forces were sent to investigate. No one put the pieces together. At the MACV compound in Hue on the evening of January 30th, the atmosphere is relaxed. The compound personnel are aware that fighting has broken out in other parts of Vietnam. Attacks have begun in Saigon, Nha Trang, and elsewhere. But there has been no indication of trouble in Hue. Many are looking forward to getting some sleep. Some are writing letters home. Others are playing cards. No alert has been issued. The compound's defenses, such as they are minimal. Sandbags, some concertina wire, a few machine guns. This is an advisory compound, not a combat base. There are cooks here, clerks, intelligence analysts, communications specialists. Maybe 1 in 4 is combat infantry. At the 1st ARVN Division headquarters in the Citadel, General Ngo Quang Truong is uneasy. He cannot put his finger on it, but something feels wrong. 2 nights ago, he put his troops on alert. When nothing happened, he sent his American advisors home, but kept his own men ready. This instinct will save his headquarters and possibly the entire battle. The Black Panthers, the Hak Bao, Truong's elite reconnaissance company are at Tay Loc Airfield. These are all volunteer troops, wearing distinctive black fatigues, considered the finest unit in the 1st ARVN Division. They number about 240 men, and they are some of the toughest soldiers in the entire South Vietnamese army. They will soon be tested beyond anything they have experienced. At Phu, Bai Combat Base, 8 miles south of Hue, U.S. Marines of Task Force X-Ray are settling in for the night. The base is home to elements of the 1st and 5th Marine Regiments. Most of the Marines here have been in country for months. They are experienced jungle fighters, veterans of operations with names like Prairie, Lancaster, Scotland. They know how to patrol in the thick vegetation, how to call in airstrikes, how to set up ambushes along trails. But urban combat, street fighting, building to building, room to room, that is something else entirely. That is something the Marine Corps has not trained for since the Korean War. And even then, only a handful of the men at Phu Bai have any experience with it. The last time American Marines engaged in sustained urban combat was Seoul in September 1950, 18 years ago. The tactics have been largely forgotten. the manuals gathering dust. Urban warfare is not part of the curriculum at Marine Corps schools. Why would it be? This is Vietnam. This is a war of rice paddies and jungle trails and mountain fire bases. Cities are where you go for R&R, not where you fight. This lack of preparation is about to cost American and South Vietnamese forces dearly. At 3:30 a.m. on January 31st, approximately 11,000 North Vietnamese troops are in position around Hue. The weather is overcast, temperature in the 50s, light rain is falling, visibility is poor, everything is ready. At the Chan Thai Gate, the western gate of the Citadel, a small team of NVA sappers dressed in ARVN uniforms approaches the guards. The sappers speak perfect Vietnamese. They have forged papers. In the darkness and confusion, they get close enough to kill the guards with knives, silently, efficiently. They open the massive wooden gates from inside. A flashlight blinks twice. The signal. 800 men of the 800th Battalion, 6th NVA Regiment pour through the gate. They are followed by the 802nd Battalion and elements of the 12th NVA Sapper Battalion. They move with purpose, with precision. They know exactly where they are going. They have maps. They have trained for this. But the attack does not begin with the ground assault. First, the signal must be given. At precisely 3:40 a.m., rocket artillery batteries positioned in the hills west of Hue open fire. The sound of outgoing rockets is a distinctive whoosh, a freight train sound that grows louder and louder until it is overwhelming. The 122mm rockets trace orange arcs across the night sky, beautiful and terrible at the same time. They impact all over the city. Government buildings, ARVN positions, the airfield, random streets. The purpose is not precision, but terror. Wake everyone up, announce the attack, create chaos. At the MACV compound, Colonel George Adkisson, commander of Advisory Team 3, steps outside his quarters at the first sound. He is a career officer, 50 years old, experienced. He served in World War II. He knows what is coming. The first rounds hit the tile roof of a nearby building, the distinctive crack of 82mm mortars. Seconds later, the heavier impacts of the 122mm rockets shake the ground. The compound is under attack. Men are running everywhere, grabbing weapons, pulling on boots, heading for fighting positions. A medical corpsman is screaming for everyone to get down. The impact of the rockets is staggering. Each one carries nearly 40 pounds of high explosive. When they hit concrete, they penetrate before detonating, maximizing the damage. When they hit earth, the shrapnel sprays outward in a cone of death. One of the first casualties is Sergeant George Gonzalez. Not the same Gonzalez you will hear about later. A different man, a supply sergeant. He is running across the courtyard when a rocket lands 10 feet away. The blast picks him up and throws him through the air like a rag doll. He is dead before he hits the ground, his body torn apart by shrapnel. At the Citadel, the 802nd NVA Battalion is assaulting General Truong's headquarters at Mong Ka compound. This is the most important target in the entire Citadel. If this falls, the entire ARVN command and control structure collapses. The attackers outnumber the defenders at least 5-1, possibly 10-1. They hit the compound from multiple directions, using B-40 rockets to blow holes in walls, then following with infantry. But Truong is ready. His Black Panthers, initially at Tay Loc Airfield, receive orders to fall back to Mong Ka. This is a dangerous maneuver, moving through streets now crawling with enemy soldiers in darkness, under fire. But the Black Panthers are exceptional troops, and many of them are natives of Hue. They know every street, every alley, every shortcut. Civilians come out of their homes despite the danger and guide them, showing them routes around enemy concentrations. One of the Black Panther officers later recalled, "The people helped us. Old women, young boys. They came out and told us where the communists were. They showed us back ways through the city. Without them, many of us would have died." When the Black Panthers reach Mong Ka, they hit the NVA from behind, catching them by surprise. A vicious close-quarters fight erupts. The NVA have the numbers, but the Black Panthers have the advantage of surprise and are fighting for their homes. As one Black Panther captain told his men, "Your families live in this city, your mothers, your wives, your children. We are literally defending our own homes. Fight like it." The fighting is savage. Grenades arc through the darkness. Automatic weapons fire echoes off the ancient walls. Men fight with knives and entrenching tools when their ammunition runs out. The NVA get within 50 meters of Truong's command post before they are driven back. For now, Mang Ka holds, but it is surrounded, cut off, under constant attack. General Truong and his staff are trapped. At Tay Lok Airfield, the 800th NVA Battalion is having better luck. The airfield is lightly defended, mostly support personnel, mechanics, and pilots. Within an hour, the NVA have overrun the entire facility. They destroy the helicopters and light aircraft on the ground. They plant mines on the runway. They establish defensive positions in the hangars and control tower. Tai Lok Airfield is theirs. South of the river, the 4th NVA Regiment is sweeping through the new city. The 804th Battalion hits the Ma CV compound from the north and west. The 810th Battalion strikes government buildings and the prison. Local Viet Cong guerrillas emerge from hiding and join the attack. Within an hour, every major government installation south of the river is under communist control except for two: the MACV compound and a small U.S. Navy LCU ramp on the waterfront where landing craft are docked. At the prison, the communists free the inmates, Viet Cong, who have been captured, along with common criminals. They arm the VC prisoners and put them to work immediately. The criminals are simply told to create chaos, and they do. The provincial hospital is seized. Wounded ARVN soldiers in the wards are executed in their beds, shot, or bayoneted where they lay. Doctors and nurses who try to intervene are shot. One of the doctors, a French physician named Dr. Crovosa, is taken outside and executed with a bullet to the back of the head. The hospital will remain under communist control for the entire battle, and the conditions there will become nightmarish. At the ARVN tank depot at Tam Tai, pre-planted explosives detonate simultaneously, destroying dozens of armored vehicles. This is the work of Viet Cong sappers, who infiltrated days earlier and placed charges under the vehicles. The explosions are massive, secondary detonations as fuel and ammunition ignite. The entire depot becomes an inferno. The loss of these tanks will severely hamper ARVN counterattacks. Let me give you a sense of how quickly this is happening. At 3:40, the first rockets land. By 4 a.m., 20 minutes later, most of the city south of the river is under communist control. By 5 a.m., the Citadel is largely in enemy hands except for the Mang Ka compound. By 6 a.m., as the sun begins to rise, the battle for Hue is essentially over. The communists have won. Hue has fallen. And now comes the image that will define this battle for the Vietnamese people. Dawn breaks slowly over Hue on January 31st. The sky is gray, overcast. Rain is falling steadily now. The temperature is in the low 50s, cold for Vietnam. Smoke rises from burning buildings throughout the city. The sound of gunfire continues, sporadic now, as the last pockets of resistance are eliminated or go to ground. Citizens of Hue, who have spent the night huddled in their homes, listening to the sounds of battle, venture cautiously into the streets. What they see stops them cold. The gold and red flag of the Republic of Vietnam, the flag of South Vietnam. No. Longer flies from the Cot Co, the flag tower at the front wall of the Citadel. In its place, snapping in the wind 120 feet above the ground, is the flag of the National Liberation Front, the Viet Cong flag, gold star on a red and blue field. The sight is stunning, the symbolism overwhelming. Everyone in Hue can see this flag. Everyone in Hue knows what it means. The communists control the city. The government is gone. The Americans have fled. Hue has been liberated or conquered, depending on your perspective. At the base of the flagpole, NVA soldiers have thrown the South Vietnamese flag. It lies in a shredded heap, cut to ribbons with knives. This is deliberate, symbolic. The old order is destroyed. A new order has arrived. The flag tower itself is not just any flagpole. The Cot Co dates back to 1809, built during the reign of Emperor Jia Long. It stands on a two-story octagonal base called the Ki Dai, each side measuring about 30 feet. The flagpole itself rises 120 feet into the air. It is the tallest structure in Hue, visible from miles away, and it is historically significant beyond measure. This is the same flagpole where, in 1945, revolutionaries raised the flag that triggered Emperor Bao Dai's abdication, ending 143 years of imperial rule. For the communists, raising their flag here in 1968 is more than a military action. It is a declaration. We are the legitimate government of Vietnam. We are restoring what was taken from us. This is our victory. But for the South Vietnamese, the sight of that flag is heartbreaking. For the ARVN soldiers trapped at Mong Ca compound, seeing that flag every morning when the sun rises will be a psychological blow. A constant reminder that they are surrounded, cut off, that the enemy controls their city. That flag will fly for 25 days. Now, throughout the city, the communists are consolidating their control. Loudspeakers are set up at major intersections. Political cadres begin broadcasting messages. The National Liberation Front has liberated Hue. Do not be afraid, remain in your homes. Those who have committed crimes against the people must report for re-education. The following people must report to the provincial headquarters immediately. And then the names begin. Long lists of names, government officials, police officers, military officers, teachers, professors, Catholic priests, anyone who worked with Americans, anyone who supported the Thieu government, specific names, full names, addresses. The people listening are stunned. How do they know all this? How do they have these detailed lists? Some people report as ordered. They are afraid of what will happen if they do not. They believe the promises of re-education. They think they will answer some questions, denounce the government, and be allowed to go home. They are wrong. Others go into hiding. They barricade themselves in their homes. They flee to relatives in other parts of the city. Some try to make it to the ARVN compound or the MACV compound, anywhere they think they might be safe. The Viet Cong and NVA are going door to door now in certain neighborhoods. They have maps. They know which houses to search. They are looking for specific people. When they find someone on the list, they bind their hands behind their backs. Sometimes they bind multiple people together in groups of 10 or 20 using wire or rope. Then they march them away. Where are they taking them? No one knows. Not yet. At the MACV compound, the situation is desperate. 200 men, most of them support personnel, are surrounded by at least a battalion of enemy troops, probably more. The compound is not designed to withstand a siege. The perimeter is sandbags and concertina wire. The buildings are not fortified. There are no bunkers, no prepared fighting positions, no interlocking fields of fire. This is supposed to be an administrative facility, not a fortress. Colonel Atkinson is organizing the defense. Every man capable of holding a weapon is assigned a position. Cooks, clerks, intelligence analysts, everyone is now infantry. They have M16 rifles, M60 machine guns, M79 grenade launchers. They have limited ammunition, they have no artillery support, they have no tanks. And most critically, the weather is so bad that air support is impossible. A corpsman named Frank Dozema is manning an M60 machine gun in a tower when an explosion blows off the lower part of his legs. He is dragged to the dispensary, but the medevac helicopter cannot land due to enemy fire. Dozema bleeds out. He dies asking for his mother. He is 19 years old. Throughout the day on January 31st, the NVA probed the MACV defenses. They are not trying to overrun the compound. They do not need to. They have the rest of the city. They can keep the Americans pinned here with minimal effort. Snipers fire from buildings across the street. Mortars drop in regularly. B-40 rockets slam into the walls. The defenders fire back, but they are burning through ammunition at an alarming rate. Messages are sent to Phu Bai. We are under heavy attack. We are surrounded. We need help. Send relief force immediately. At Phu Bai, Brigadier General Foster Lahu, commanding Task Force X-Ray, receives fragmentary reports all morning. Attacks at Hue. Heavy fighting. MACV compound surrounded. But the reports are confusing, contradictory. Radio communications are being jammed by Vietnamese voices. Some reports say a small enemy force has entered the city. Others describe thousands of troops. La Hue has no clear intelligence on enemy strength or dispositions. What he does know is that attacks are happening all over his area of responsibility. Da Nang is under attack. Phu Bai itself has been probed. The fire base at Khe San is still under siege. He has limited forces and needs to commit them carefully. But the MACV compound cannot be left to fend for itself. Hue makes a decision. He will send the only unit immediately available, Alpha Company, 1st Battalion, 1st Marines. Company A, about 160 men under Captain Gordon Batchelor. Alpha Company loads onto trucks around 9 a.m. The original plan is to send them south first to link up with an ARVN unit, but that unit never appears, so the trucks turn around and head north toward Hue. The plan is simple: drive into the city, relieve MACV, assess the situation. Simple. Except nothing about this battle will be simple. As the convoy approaches Hue from the south, Captain Batchelor is sitting in the lead truck, scanning the road ahead. Something is wrong. The streets are empty. There should be civilians, refugees fleeing the fighting, something. But there is no one. Just empty streets, abandoned vehicles, an eerie silence broken only by the distant sound of gunfire. The convoy includes 6x6 trucks and several gun jeeps. It is not an armored formation. These are soft-skinned vehicles. As they approach a bridge near An Q, about 3 kilometers southeast of the MACV compound, they encounter 4 M48 Patton tanks from the 3rd Tank Battalion that had been heading to the Navy ramp for transport north to another operation. The tankers have stopped. Ahead of them on the road are destroyed ARVN tanks and armored personnel carriers, smoldering wrecks. The ARVN 7th Cavalry Squadron tried to break through earlier and was ambushed. The road is blocked by burning vehicles. Lieutenant Colonel Edward Lamontagne, who is overseeing the tank transfer, confers with Captain Batchelor. Lamontagne is an experienced officer. He has seen combat before. He recognizes what they are looking at: a kill zone. Whoever destroyed those ARVN vehicles is still out there, waiting. But the MACV compound needs relief. People are dying. Lamontagne makes a command decision. The tanks will accompany Alpha Company. The tankers do not like this. They were heading somewhere else. They have orders. But Lamontagne pulls rank. 4 M48 tanks join the convoy. Marines climb onto the tanks, gripping the handholds. This is safer than riding in the trucks, and it gives them elevated firing positions. The convoy begins moving forward again, cautiously now, everyone alert, weapons ready. At approximately 10:30, as they cross the bridge and approach the urban outskirts, the world explodes. The ambush is perfect. A B-40 rocket slams into the lead tank with a flash and a thunderous boom. The shaped charge penetrates the hull. Inside the tank, men are screaming. Captain Batchelor is thrown from the tank. He lands hard, his ears ringing. He cannot hear anything except a high-pitched whine. Blood is pouring from his right forearm, his right thigh, his left knee. Shrapnel wounds, lots of them. His radio operator, Lance Corporal Lester Tully, is hit worse. Both legs are severed at the knees. He is trying to crawl, leaving a trail of blood. Another Marine grabs him, drags him behind the tank. A corpsman is working on him frantically, trying to stop the bleeding, but there is too much blood. It is everywhere, pumping out with each heartbeat. The ambush is coming from all sides now. Buildings on both sides of the street, rooftops, windows, alleys. The NVA have had hours to prepare this position. They know exactly where to place their machine guns, their rocket teams, their snipers. They have firing lanes calculated, escape routes planned. The Marines are reacting on instinct now. They pile off the tanks, taking cover behind vehicles, behind low walls, in ditches. They are returning fire, spraying buildings with M16 fire, but they can barely see the enemy. Muzzle flashes in windows, shadows moving on rooftops. The NVA are using the terrain perfectly, exposing themselves only for seconds at a time. The tanks are firing their 90mm main guns, point blank into buildings. Each shot is devastating, blowing massive holes in walls, bringing down entire sections of buildings. The 50 caliber machine guns on the tank commander's cupolas are hammering away, chewing up facades, shattering windows. Spent brass casings rain down onto the Marines taking cover beside the tanks. One Marine later described it. It was like being in a blender, noise and smoke and chaos. You could not tell where the firing was coming from. You just shot at anything that looked like it might have an enemy behind it. I went through 6 magazines in the first 5 minutes. 6 magazines is 180 rounds. I do not know if I hit anyone. Sergeant Alfredo Gonzalez is performing heroically. He is everywhere, running from position to position, reorganizing scattered squads, leading counterattacks against machine gun nests. He throws grenades into buildings. He fires his M16 from the hip while running. He pulls wounded men to cover. Other Marines are watching him and thinking the same thing. This man is either the bravest person we have ever seen, or he is insane. Maybe both. Gunnery Sergeant John Canley is also distinguishing himself. Canley is a large man, powerful, an imposing physical presence. He has a reputation in the battalion as someone who never ducks and never crawls. When rounds are incoming, Canley stands up as if to say, "You cannot hit me." It is either supreme confidence or fatalistic acceptance. Either way, it is inspiring to the young Marines who are terrified out of their minds. When Captain Batchelor is hit and goes down, Canley immediately assumes command. He does not wait for orders. He does not call for instructions. He simply starts giving commands, and the Marines obey because Gunny Canley always knows what to do. Second platoon, flank left. Third platoon, covering fire. Corpsmen up. Get those wounded back behind the tanks. His voice cuts through the chaos. Men respond to it. They move where he tells them to move. They fire where he tells them to fire. This is leadership under fire in its purest form. But despite the heroics, Alpha Company cannot advance. They cannot even hold their ground. The volume of fire is too intense. Men are being hit. The wounded are piling up. Radio calls for air support go unanswered. The ceiling is too low, the weather too bad. Artillery is available, but the enemy is too close, danger close, and firing artillery risks hitting the Marines. This was supposed to be a relief column, a quick drive into the city. Instead, Alpha Company is pinned down, taking casualties, barely hanging on. Word reaches Phu Bai that Alpha Company is in trouble. Lieutenant Colonel Marcus Gravel, commanding officer of 1st Battalion, 1st Marines, does not wait for orders. He grabs his operations officer, Major Walter Murphy. He rounds up Golf Company, 2nd Battalion, 5th Marines, which happens to be at Phu Bai. He loads them on trucks and heads north. Golf Company arrives in early afternoon and links up with Alpha Company. With their help, the combined force is able to push forward. They fight their way through the ambush, meter by meter, building by building. It takes hours. The casualties mount. By the time they reach the MACV compound at approximately 15:15, 3:15 in the afternoon, Alpha Company has lost 10 men killed and 30 wounded. More than 50% casualties in just 2 hours, traveling 1 mile. When they arrive at MACV, Colonel Adkisson briefs Lieutenant Colonel Gravel on the situation. Adkisson seems optimistic. He tells Gravel that the Citadel is in good shape, that General Truong has things under control. This assessment is catastrophically wrong, but Adkisson does not know that. Communications have been sporadic. Reports are confused. He is basing his assessment on incomplete information. General La Hu back at Phu Bai is operating under similar misconceptions. He believes this is a small enemy force, maybe a few companies, that have infiltrated the city. He believes they can be quickly dealt with. He orders Gravel to take his men across the Perfume River, push through to General Truong's headquarters, and help finish off the enemy. Gravel will later call this the most stupid order he ever received in his military career. Leaving Alpha Company at MACV to help with the defense, Gravel takes Golf Company and attempts to cross the Nguyen Huang Bridge, the main bridge connecting the new city to the Citadel. He has 3 M48 tanks with him, and he manages to get several ARVN tanks to join the attack. The American tanks are too heavy for the bridge. The structure cannot support 50 tons of steel. So Gravel leaves the M48s on the south bank, where they can provide direct fire support, and he leads Golf Company across on foot, along with the lighter ARVN tanks. They make it across. So far, so good. Then they turn left along the southeast wall of the Citadel, heading toward the Dongba Gate, and they walk into hell. The Citadel. Walls here rise 30 feet straight up, ancient stone and compressed earth. At the top, looking down on them, are NVA soldiers, hundreds of them, and they open fire all at once. It is like walking into a firing squad. AK-47s, machine guns, B-40 rockets, recoilless rifles, all firing from elevated positions, shooting down at Marines who have no cover. The noise is indescribable. The air is full of bullets and shrapnel. Men are going down everywhere. Corporal Lester Tully somehow manages to knock out an enemy machine gun nest with a hand grenade, giving the Marines a brief window to establish a toehold. But there is no way forward. The fire is too intense. Gravel realizes they are about to be wiped out. He orders a withdrawal. The Marines pull back across the bridge under fire. They carry their wounded. They drag their dead. The ARVN tanks cover them, firing up at the walls. By 10 p.m., Gravel has his men back at the MACV compound. Golf Company has lost a third of its men. And that is the end of day one. January 31st, 1968. The longest day. Let me give you the accounting. The Communists control almost all of Hue. They hold the entire Citadel except for the Mang Ka compound, where General Truong and his men are surrounded. They hold all of the new city south of the river, except for the MACV compound and the Navy ramp. They have seized government buildings, military facilities, police stations, the hospital, the prison, the airfield. They have raised their flag over the ancient imperial capital. American and ARVN forces have suffered heavy casualties with almost nothing to show for it. They have established 2 small defensive perimeters but control nothing else. They cannot resupply. They cannot evacuate their wounded. They cannot get air support because of the weather. They cannot even get an accurate count of enemy forces because every time they try to advance, they run into overwhelming fire. And perhaps most ominously throughout the city, the Communists are rounding up civilians, the people whose names are on the lists, government officials, teachers, priests, military families. They are being marched away at gunpoint. Where are they going? The answer to that question will haunt Vietnam for decades to come. Back at Task Force X-Ray headquarters in Phu Bai and at MACV headquarters in Saigon, the senior leadership is refusing to accept reality. This is not incompetence exactly. This is something more insidious. This is what historian Mark Bowden would later call a conspiracy of denial. The officers responsible for prosecuting this war have spent months, years even, telling themselves and their superiors that the enemy is weakening, that the war is being won, that victory is just around the corner. The Tet Offensive threatens to expose all of that as fantasy, and Hue specifically threatens to become a public relations disaster of epic proportions. So they minimize it. They downplay it. They convince themselves that what is happening cannot possibly be as bad as it appears. On January 31st, General William Westmoreland reports to General Earl Wheeler, chairman of the Joint Chiefs of Staff, that Hue is occupied by 3 NVA companies. 3 companies, that is perhaps 300 men. In reality, there are 10,000 enemy troops in and around Hue. Westmoreland is off by a factor of 30. This is not a minor miscalculation. This is a complete failure to grasp the scope of what is happening. General LeHue tells his subordinates that once the Marines and ARVN forces clear out these few companies, everything will be back to normal. He has very little reliable intelligence, but what he has, he is interpreting in the most optimistic way possible. On February 2nd, LeHue declares confidently, "We control the south side of the city. The enemy has no resupply capability. Once they use up what they brought in, they are finished." This assessment is catastrophically, tragically wrong. The enemy has open supply lines running into the city from the west. They are bringing in reinforcements daily. They have ammunition for weeks. They have food stocks. They have pre-positioned supply caches throughout the city. They are not running out of anything. But LeHue does not know this because American intelligence has failed at every level. Reconnaissance aircraft fly over and report nothing unusual because the NVA are expert at camouflage and concealment. Ground patrols cannot get close enough to observe because they are driven back by fire. Radio intercepts are jammed or provide confusing information. The civilian population, those who might provide intelligence, are either in hiding, too terrified to speak, or sympathetic to the communists. The result of this intelligence failure is that single companies of Marines, 160 men, are being sent against regimental-sized enemy forces of thousands. It is not a fight, it is a slaughter. And then, the weather makes everything worse. The monsoon that the North Vietnamese planners counted on has arrived with a vengeance. February 2nd brings heavy rain, temperatures dropping into the 50s, and low clouds. The ceiling drops to 300 feet, then 200, then 100. There is a local weather phenomenon called kraken, French for drizzle, where rain-laden clouds strike the Annamite Mountains and curl back over Hue. This makes Hue one of the wettest spots in Vietnam during the northeast monsoon season. For the Marines and ARVN forces, this is a disaster. American air power has been the decisive advantage throughout the Vietnam War. Close air support from fighter bombers, napalm, cluster bombs, 500-pound bombs, 2,000-pound bombs. The ability to call in airstrikes has saved countless ground units. But now, when it is needed most, air support is grounded. The ceiling is too low. Visibility is too poor. Pilots cannot see their targets. They cannot see the ground. They cannot distinguish friend from foe in the narrow streets. A few brave pilots try anyway. They come in low, dangerously low, trying to get under the cloud ceiling. Some succeed in delivering their ordnance. Others cannot find the target and have to abort. One Marine pilot will be shot down and killed when he comes in too low, trying to help Marines on the ground. Helicopter operations are equally compromised. Medevac birds cannot get in to evacuate the wounded. Resupply choppers cannot reach isolated units. Command and control helicopters cannot provide overwatch. The Marines are used to having complete air superiority, used to calling in gunships whenever they need fire support. Now, they have nothing. They are on their own. For the North Vietnamese, this is everything they hoped for. They chose this timing specifically because they knew the weather would be bad. They knew American technology would be neutralized. They knew the fight would come down to infantry against infantry, building against building, man against man. And they are prepared for that fight in ways the Americans are not. Lieutenant Colonel Ernest Cheatham Jr. arrives at Phu Bai on February 1st with orders to take 2nd Battalion, 5th Marines, into Hue. He is 38 years old, a career Marine, and a former professional football player. Cheatham played defensive tackle for the Pittsburgh Steelers before joining the Marine Corps. He is large, powerful, intimidating, but more importantly, he is smart, and he knows what he does not know. When he receives his orders, Cheatham does something that will prove crucial. He goes to the base library. He finds 2 manuals, combat in built-up areas and an assault on a fortified position. He sits down and reads them, cover to cover. He studies the diagrams, he memorizes the tactics, he takes notes. Then he goes to the supply depot and starts scrounging weapons. He requests 106mm recoilless rifles, 3.5-inch rocket launchers, CS tear gas grenades, gas masks for every man in the battalion, extra demolitions, Bangalore torpedoes, anything that might be useful for urban combat. His staff thinks he is crazy. They are going to Hue to mop up a small enemy force, right? Why do they need all this extra gear? Cheatham does not argue with them. He just keeps loading supplies onto trucks. When Cheatham asks Colonel Stanley Hughes for intelligence on what they are facing, Hughes is brutally honest. If you are looking for intelligence, you are not getting any because we do not have any. We do not know what is going on up there. Just get your men to Hue and start fighting. I will support you any way I can. Then Hughes tells Cheatham something that will become famous in Marine Corps lore. You do it any way you want. This is not an abdication of command. This is a recognition of reality. Hughes knows that he cannot micromanage this battle from Phu Bai. He cannot tell Cheatham how to clear buildings when Hughes himself has never done it, so he gives Cheatham complete tactical freedom. Do whatever you think is necessary. Use whatever tactics work. I trust you. Cheatham will take this mandate and revolutionize urban warfare. When 2nd Battalion, 5th Marines enters Hue on February 4th, Cheatham immediately sees that conventional tactics are not working. Marines are trying to advance down streets, and they are being cut to pieces by machine gun fire from windows and rooftops. They are taking fire from directions they cannot identify. They are losing men without gaining ground. Cheatham gathers his company commanders and lays out a new approach. First, combined arms teams. No more infantry advancing alone. From now on, every attack will be led by a paired tank and ontos. The M48 Patton tank provides firepower and protection. The M50 Ontos, a tracked vehicle mounting 6 106mm recoilless rifles, provides devastating anti-structure capability. The Ontos weighs only 9 tons compared to the tank's 50 tons, so it is far more maneuverable in narrow streets. Infantry protects the armor from enemy sappers. The armor protects the infantry from everything else. Second, stay off the streets. The streets are killing zones. Instead, advance through buildings. Use C4 explosive to blow holes in walls. Use 3.5-inch rockets to create man-sized openings. Move from building to building without ever exposing yourself on the street. Third, soften every position before assaulting. Use the tank's 90mm gun to blow holes in walls. Use the Ontos's 6 recoilless rifles to destroy fortified positions. Use tear gas to drive the enemy out of buildings. Use mortars to suppress enemy fire. Pound the position until resistance weakens, then assault. Fourth, aim low with the rockets. This is a crucial lesson learned through trial and error. When Marines first started using 3.5-inch rockets, they aimed for windows. Makes sense, right? But rockets fired through windows tended to pass straight through the room and explode on the far wall, missing the defenders. Cheatham orders his men to aim below windows or at the base of windows. The rocket penetrates the wall below the window, then explodes inside the room. This is far more effective. Fifth, use gas liberally. Cheatham has discovered that the NVA do not have gas masks. This gives the Marines a huge advantage. CS tear gas, the riot control agent, is devastating in enclosed spaces. It burns the eyes, the throat, the lungs. It causes uncontrollable coughing and tearing. It makes it nearly impossible to fight. Marines wearing gas masks can advance into gassed buildings with relative safety. The E8 gas launcher becomes one of the most important weapons in the Marine arsenal. It is a rifle-mounted grenade launcher that fires CS grenades. Each Marine carrying an E8 has about 40 grenades. A platoon can saturate a building with gas in minutes. Sixth, use the mules. The M274 mechanical mule is a small, flatbed vehicle, basically a motorized cart, but it can carry a 106mm recoilless rifle. This gives the Marines mobile, direct-fire artillery support that can follow them into narrow alleys and tight spaces where tanks cannot go. These tactics are not in any manual. Cheatham is inventing them on the fly, adapting to the battlefield, learning from mistakes, refining the approach with each engagement. And critically, he is sharing these lessons with other battalions. What works for 2nd Battalion? 5th Marines gets passed to 1st Battalion, 1st Marines, then to 1st Battalion, 5th Marines. The entire Marine force is learning and adapting together. But even with better tactics, the fighting is brutal beyond description. Let me walk you through what it takes to clear a single city block in Hue. This will help you understand why this battle takes so long, why the casualties are so high, why the Marines call it worse than anything they experienced in the Pacific in World War II. You start with reconnaissance. Scouts move forward, staying in the shadows, observing the next block. They are looking for enemy positions, machine gun nests, sniper positions, bunkers, obstacles. They note the location of every window, every door, every alley, every vehicle that could provide cover. They draw up a hasty sketch. They brief the platoon commander. Then you bring up the killer team, 1 M48 tank and 1 M50 Ontos. The tank positions itself to provide overwatch and suppressive fire. The Ontos moves forward to the first building that needs to be cleared. The infantry squad follows close behind, using the Ontos for cover. The Ontos fires one or more of its 106mm recoilless rifles into the building. These are not small weapons. Each rifle fires a projectile about 4 inches in diameter, with a shaped charge that can penetrate armor. When fired into a building, the results are catastrophic. Walls collapse. Floors cave in. Anyone inside who is not killed by the initial explosion is buried under rubble or deafened by the overpressure. While the dust is still settling, Marines fire E8 tear gas grenades through the holes. The CS gas fills the building. Now you wait. Sometimes NVA soldiers come stumbling out, coughing, gasping, unable to see. The Marines cut them down or take them prisoner if they surrender. Sometimes there is no one alive inside. Sometimes the enemy stays put, enduring the gas because they know they will die if they come out. After a few minutes, the assault team goes in. 4 to 6 Marines wearing gas masks. They enter through the hole blown by the recoilless rifle, not through the door. Doors can be booby-trapped. Doors are where the enemy expects you. You go through the wall. Inside, the building is a nightmare of shadows and smoke and gas. Visibility is near zero. You move room by room, covering each other, grenades ready. When you enter a room, you throw a grenade first, wait for the explosion, then enter and spray the room with automatic fire. Check behind furniture, check closets, check the ceiling. The NVA sometimes hide in attics or crawl spaces. If you find stairs, you do not go up. You call for engineers to blow the staircase, then you move to the next building. Clearing multi-story buildings is too dangerous, too time-consuming. You isolate them and bypass them. Once the building is secure, you blow a hole in the opposite wall and move to the next building. You do not go back out into the street. The street is a kill zone. You mouse hole through the entire block, building by building, until you control the whole thing. How long does this take? For a single block? Hours. Sometimes a whole day if the resistance is heavy. Now multiply that by several hundred blocks. That is the Battle of Hue. Let me give you some specific engagements to show you what this looks like in practice. The Treasury Building, February 4th. This is a large, sturdy, 3-story structure defended by over 100 PAVN soldiers. It anchors the communist defense line south of the river. From the Treasury, the NVA can fire into nearby streets, suppressing any Marine advance. It has to be taken. Fox Company, 2nd Battalion, 5th Marines draws the assignment. They approach from the east, using buildings for cover, moving through mouse holes, taking their time. 2nd Platoon reaches a wide, tree-lined street about 50 meters from the Treasury. They have to cross this street to get to the building. The moment they try, all hell breaks loose. Machine gun fire from the Treasury, machine gun fire from Lalois Elementary School to the left. The platoon is caught in a crossfire. Marines dive for cover behind trees, behind low walls, in ditches. Several men are hit in the first few seconds. Corpsmen crawl forward under fire to reach them. Lance Corporal Richard Carter has a 3.5-inch rocket launcher. He is behind a wall, loading a rocket, when a B-40 rocket-propelled grenade slams into the wall 3 feet from his head. The explosion lifts him off the ground and throws him backward. He lands hard, stunned, bleeding from the nose and ears. His loader is dead, killed instantly by shrapnel. Carter shakes his head, picks up his rocket launcher, loads another rocket by himself, and fires at the Treasury. The rocket punches through the iron gates at the building's entrance. Marines pour through. Now the tanks and Ontos move up. They pump 90mm and 106mm rounds into the building at point-blank range. Entire sections of wall collapse. An E-8 gunner fires 64 CS grenades in volleys of 4. The gas is so thick it forms a visible cloud around the building. The NVA start coming out. Some surrender. Most try to run and are shot. Marines wearing gas masks enter the building and clear it room by room. In the basement, they find a group of NVA hiding in a vault, trying to escape the gas. They will not surrender. Marines throw grenades into the vault. 24 enemy soldiers die there. The post office is next door. Same procedure, gas it, storm it, clear it. By late afternoon, the Treasury building and post office are in Marine hands. The cost, 10 Marines killed, 23 wounded, enemy dead, estimated 100 plus. This is how progress is measured in Hue, not in miles or kilometers, but in buildings. One building at a time. Joan of Arc High School, February 4th. This is a complex of buildings surrounded by a wall, located at a key intersection. Alpha Company, 1st Battalion, 1st Marines is tasked with securing it. This is the same company that took such heavy casualties on January 31st. They have been reinforced with replacements, but many of the men are still recovering from wounds or shock. The approach to the school is across open ground, about 70 meters. The NVA have machine guns in the windows covering this approach. Marines try to advance and are pinned down immediately. Sergeant Alfredo Gonzalez, the man who has been performing heroically since the first day, decides enough is enough. He grabs a light anti-tank weapon, stands up, and runs forward firing from the hip. He knocks out one machine gun position, then another. He is hit multiple times but keeps going. He reaches the school wall and starts throwing grenades over it. Then he collapses. Corpsmen reach him within seconds, but he is dying. Multiple gunshot wounds to the chest and abdomen. He dies within minutes. He will be posthumously awarded the Medal of Honor, one of only 2 Marines to receive it for the Battle of Hue. Without Gonzalez's sacrifice, the attack might have stalled. But inspired by his example, Alpha Company storms the school. They fight through the buildings, room by room, floor by floor. The fighting is close quarters, often hand to hand. When it is over, the school is secured. Alpha Company has lost more than half its strength. Of the 147 men who landed with the company on January 31st, fewer than 70 are still combat effective. The provincial headquarters, February 5th and 6th. This is the command post for the NVA 4th Regiment. It is a large, fortified compound with multiple buildings. Hotel Company, 2nd Battalion, 5th Marines has the job of taking it. Hotel Company uses everything in the playbook. Tanks pound the walls with 90mm fire. Ontos fire recoilless rifles. Mortars drop high explosive rounds inside the compound. And then the gas. Dozens and dozens of CS grenades saturate the entire complex. When the assault goes in, the NVA resistance has been broken. Many are dead. Others are coughing so badly they cannot aim their weapons. Still others have fled. The compound falls in a few hours. The loss of their regimental headquarters demoralizes the NVA forces south of the river. Their defense begins to crumble. By February 11th, Marines have fought their way to the confluence of the Perfume River and the Phu Cam Canal. They control most of the southern part of the city, but the fighting has been incredibly costly. 2nd Battalion, 5th Marines alone has suffered over 150 casualties. The Citadel still awaits. The Citadel is a different beast entirely. South of the river, the Marines were fighting through a modern city with concrete buildings, wide streets, parks. Urban warfare, yes, but urban warfare in an environment that makes some sense to 20th century soldiers. The Citadel is medieval. The architecture is ancient. The streets are narrow, winding, designed for foot traffic and ox carts, not vehicles. The buildings are old, thick-walled, built to last for centuries. And everywhere, those walls. Walls within walls. Compound walls. Garden walls. Courtyard walls. Every family compound is its own little fortress, surrounded by 8-foot walls. And dominating everything, the massive Citadel walls themselves, 30 feet high, 90 feet thick, honeycombed with tunnels and bunkers left over from the Japanese occupation in World War II. The NVA have had weeks to prepare these defenses. They have dug in. They have fortified positions. They have stockpiled ammunition. They have pre-registered mortar fire on key intersections. They know every alley, every hiding place, every escape route. For the Marines about to enter this hell, it is the most daunting battlefield they have ever faced. 1st Battalion, 5th Marines, under Major Robert H. Thompson, gets the assignment. They cross the river by boat on February 13th. 5 tanks make it across to support them, ferried over on Navy landing craft. The Marines are told this is a mop-up operation. The ARVN airborne units have been fighting in the Citadel for days, and have supposedly cleared most of it. The Marines just need to finish off the remaining resistance. This assessment, like so much else in this battle, is completely wrong. When Thompson's men land and start moving inland, they are shocked by what they see. Bodies everywhere, destroyed buildings, rubble. The stench of death is overwhelming, and within minutes of moving forward, they come under heavy fire. Where are the ARVN airborne units that are supposed to be here? Gone. Redeployed to Saigon without telling anyone. The Vietnamese Joint General Staff decided that since the Marines had arrived, the airborne could be released for duty elsewhere. No coordination, no handoff. The airborne simply pulled out, leaving a gap in the line that the NVA immediately exploited. Major Thompson is furious. He later confronts General Truong about this failure, though it is not Truong's fault. The decision was made in Saigon without consulting the local commanders. So, now 1st Battalion, 5th Marines, about 800 men, is facing several thousand NVA soldiers in the Citadel with no ARVN support. They are on their own. Alpha Company takes point and advances toward the Imperial Palace. They make it about 200 meters. Before the entire world explodes, fire is coming from every direction, from ground-level windows, from rooftops, from the Citadel walls above them. The NVA have set up a killing zone, and Alpha Company has walked right into it. The company takes cover and returns fire, but they can barely see the enemy. The NVA are masters of cover and concealment. They fire a few shots, then disappear. They use spider holes, One man fighting positions with camouflage lids that are invisible until the lid opens and a weapon appears. They use tunnels to move between positions, popping up behind the Marines, attacking from unexpected directions. The tanks are invaluable here. Their thick armor protects them from most of what the NVA can throw at them, and their main guns are terrifying weapons in close quarters. But the NVA know how to fight tanks. They use B-40 rockets to disable tracks or damage sights. They drop satchel charges from rooftops onto the thin top armor. They lure tanks into narrow alleys where they cannot turn around, then attack from behind. One Marine tanker describes it. It was like being blind and deaf inside that tank. You could see almost nothing through the periscopes. The noise was incredible. Our own gun firing, machine guns hammering, rounds pinging off the armor. We just pointed the main gun at whatever looked like a target and fired. I have no idea what we hit. Progress is measured in meters. Alpha Company advances 50 meters in a day. The next day, 40 meters. The NVA fight for every building, every courtyard, every wall. When they are finally driven out of a position, they often reoccupy it at night, after the Marines pull back. This means the Marines have to fight for the same ground multiple times. The Dongba Gate Tower becomes the focus of intense fighting. This is a massive structure in the eastern Citadel wall, offering commanding views of the surrounding area. Whoever controls this tower controls that entire section of the Citadel. The NVA have fortified it heavily. On February 13th, Delta Company attacks the tower. They fight for 6 hours, climbing over rubble, throwing grenades into firing slits, using flamethrowers to burn out bunkers. They finally reach the top of the tower, raise the American flag, and think they have won. Then, a hidden NVA machine gun opens up, killing 3 Marines and wounding 6 more. The Americans pull back. Artillery and naval gunfire pound the tower throughout the night. By morning, the structure is barely standing, reduced to a pile of rubble. But NVA soldiers are still in there, still fighting, buried in the ruins but refusing to give up. Delta Company has to assault again. Finally, after another day of brutal close combat, the tower falls. Cost: 6 Marines killed, over 50 wounded. Enemy dead, unknown, but dozens are buried in the collapsed structure. But holding ground in the Citadel is as hard as taking it. The NVA counterattack constantly, usually at night. They know the terrain better than the Marines. They move through tunnels in covered ways that the Marines do not know exist. They hit weak points in the Marine lines, infiltrate, cause chaos, then withdraw before reinforcements arrive. One night, February 15th, an NVA unit infiltrates through a gap in the lines and attacks the rear area where the wounded are being treated and ammunition is stored. A vicious firefight erupts in near-total darkness. Marines are fighting hand-to-hand, using bayonets and entrenching tools. When dawn comes and the NVA are driven off, the Marines find 16 enemy bodies. 5 Marines are dead. The wounded who survived the fighting were executed where they lay. The corpsmen who tried to protect them were killed. By February 20th, 1st Battalion, 5th Marines has been fighting continuously for a week in the Citadel. They have advanced about 1,000 meters. They have lost 40 men killed and over 200 wounded. The battalion is exhausted, low on ammunition, and morale is suffering. The weather is still bad, so air support is intermittent. Resupply is difficult because the boats crossing the river are under fire. Evacuating the wounded is a nightmare. They have to be carried through streets under sniper fire to get to the river, then loaded on boats that are also under fire. Major Thompson makes a bold decision. He is going to try something radical, something that goes against conventional wisdom. He is going to attack at night. Night attacks are generally avoided in Vietnam. The Americans rely heavily on their technological advantages: air support, artillery, sophisticated communications. At night, these advantages are diminished. The NVA, on the other hand, are comfortable operating at night. They are used to it. They prefer it. But Thompson has been observing the enemy's patterns. He has noticed that the NVA maintain a forward fighting line during the day, then pull back at night to secondary positions. The forward positions are lightly held at night, and the NVA reoccupy them at dawn. What if the Marines attacked when these positions were lightly held? On the night of February 20th, going into February 21st, Thompson launches his surprise night attack. 3 10-man teams infiltrate forward at 0300 hours. They move silently, carefully, avoiding known enemy positions. They reach the forward NVA positions and find them sparsely defended, just as Thompson predicted. They seize several strong points with minimal fighting, then they wait. When dawn comes and the NVA move forward to reoccupy their usual positions, they walk into a trap. Marines open fire from positions the NVA thought were theirs. Caught in the open, the NVA are cut down. 16 enemy soldiers are killed. The Marines lose 3. More importantly, the night attack breaks the stalemate. Marine momentum revives. They push forward aggressively, exploiting the breakthrough. By February 22nd, they have advanced another 500 meters. Now, the NVA are running out of space. They have been pushed back to the southwestern corner of the Citadel and the Imperial Palace complex itself. Their supply lines are cut. Their casualties are mounting. Reinforcements cannot get through. The battle is turning. On February 23rd, the ARVN takes over the lead. The Vietnamese Marines, some of the toughest soldiers in the ARVN, assault the Imperial Palace grounds. This is a political decision as much as a military one. The Vietnamese government wants Vietnamese troops to be the ones who retake this symbolic location. The fighting is intense. The NVA defend every building, every gate, every courtyard. But they are outnumbered now, and they are running low on ammunition. The Vietnamese Marines fight with exceptional courage. They know they are fighting for their cultural heritage, for the heart of Vietnamese civilization. On February 24th, soldiers of the 212 Company, 3rd ARVN Regiment fight their way to the flag tower. At midday, they tear down the National Liberation Front flag that has flown there for 25 days. They raise the gold and red flag of South Vietnam. Marines and soldiers throughout the city see it go up and cheer. The Citadel is liberated, but pockets of resistance remain. The NVA are still holding out in parts of the Imperial Palace and in fortified positions in the southwest corner. The Vietnamese Marines press the attack. Building by building, they clear the enemy out. On February 25th at 0300, the 4th Vietnamese Marine Battalion launches a final surprise night assault. They hit the remaining NVA positions from multiple directions, using the same tactics the Americans have been employing: combined arms, tear gas, aggressive close combat. By dawn, organized resistance has collapsed. The surviving NVA soldiers retreat through the western gate and flee into the countryside. The Battle of Hue is over. Officially, the operation ends on March 2nd, 1968. But the serious fighting concluded on February 25th with the capture of the Imperial Palace. 26 days of urban combat, the longest single battle of the Vietnam War, and one of the bloodiest. Now, I have to tell you about the darkest chapter of the Battle of Hue. This is difficult to discuss, but it is essential to understanding what happened here. During their 25-day occupation of Hue, the North Vietnamese Army and Viet Cong forces carried out a systematic massacre of South Vietnamese civilians. This was not collateral damage from the fighting. This was not accidental. This was deliberate, planned, organized mass murder. Remember those lists I mentioned earlier? The lists of names that communist cadres had compiled over months and years? Teachers, government officials, police, military officers, Catholic priests, anyone associated with the South Vietnamese government or the Americans. Those lists were put to use. Starting on the first day of the occupation, loudspeakers throughout the city broadcast names and instructions. The following people must report to the provincial headquarters for 3 days of political re-education. Some people reported voluntarily, believing the promises. Others were rounded up at their homes. Communist cadres went door to door with lists, calling out names, pulling people from their houses. The victims were diverse. Government officials at every level, from the provincial governor down to low-level clerks. National police officers and their families. ARVN military officers, even those on leave visiting family for Tet. Teachers at the university and high schools. Catholic priests and Buddhist monks deemed insufficiently supportive of the revolution. Business owners, doctors who had treated Americans, anyone who had worked at the U.S. consulate or with American aid programs, wealthy families, and perhaps most tragically, the families of any of the above, wives, children, elderly parents. The victims were usually bound, hands tied behind their backs with wire or rope. Sometimes groups of 10 or 20 were tied together in long lines. They were marched away under guard. People watching from their windows saw these groups being led out of the city, but no one knew where they were going. The answer, we now know, is to killing sites, fields outside the city, gullies, stream beds. The communists had selected these locations in advance, places where large numbers of people could be killed and buried quickly. The methods varied. Most victims were shot, usually in the back of the head while kneeling. Some were buried alive. Their bodies were later found with bound hands, gags in their mouths, no visible wounds, dirt in their lungs. Some were bludgeoned to death with rifle butts or shovels to save ammunition. Groups were sometimes lined up in front of trenches and cut down with machine gun fire. One of the most horrific incidents occurred at Phu Cam Cathedral, in the Catholic district of the city. On February 5th, 5 days into the occupation, communist forces surrounded the cathedral, where hundreds of people were sheltering. They ordered all able-bodied males over the age of 15 to come out. About 400 men and boys complied. The communists told them they would receive 3 days of re-education and then be released. The men were marched 9 kilometers south to a place called Da Mai Creek, near the foot of the Nam Hoa Mountains. There, they were executed, shot, or beaten to death. Their bodies were left in a mass grave. Their families did not learn what happened for 19 months. In September 1969, 3 Viet Cong defectors led investigators to the site. The bodies were exhumed, 400 men and boys, most still in their Tet holiday clothes. Captain Ho Tai, a Viet Cong commander who defected after the battle, later confirmed the Communist Party was particularly anxious to get those people at Phu Cam. The Catholics were considered particular enemies of ours. Foreign nationals were not spared. 4 German doctors from Hue University's Faculty of Medicine were killed, along with 1 professor's wife. 2 French priests, Father Urbain and Father Guy, were executed. Father Urbain was buried alive, his body found with hands bound and a gag in his mouth. Father Guy was stripped of his cassock, forced to kneel, and shot in the back of the head. Stephen Miller, a 28-year-old U.S. Information Service officer, was captured at the home of Vietnamese friends where he was sheltering. He was marched to a field behind a Catholic seminary, forced to kneel, and shot. The discovery of the mass graves began in February 1968, even while fighting was still ongoing. ARVN troops advancing through certain areas found bodies, then more bodies, then mass graves. The excavations continued for over a year and a half. Here is the grim accounting, February through April 1968. Approximately 1,200 bodies found in 18 locations. The largest single discovery was at Gia Hoi High School, where 170 bodies were found buried in the schoolyard. At Tang Quang Tu Pagoda, 67 bodies. In the area near the imperial tombs, 201. March through July 1969. Over 800 bodies discovered at the Phu Thu Salt Flats and Sand Dune area. A local farmer was walking through the area when he tripped over something, wire sticking up from the sand. When he pulled on it, a skeletal hand emerged from the ground. Investigators excavated the entire area and found over 800 bodies. September 1969, the discovery at Da Mai Creek. I already mentioned. At least 250 to 428 bodies, the exact number disputed because the remains were so deteriorated after 19 months. November 1969, at least 300 bodies at the Phu Thu Salt Flats. This site was only discovered because local villagers finally felt safe enough to report it. For 20 months, they had kept silent, terrified that if the communists returned, they would be killed for revealing the location. The total number of bodies recovered is approximately 2,800, but investigators believe this is not the complete number. Many victims were never found. They may have been buried in locations that remain undiscovered. They may have been dumped in the river. They may have been buried in graves that were later disturbed by artillery fire or bulldozers clearing rubble. The South Vietnamese government listed 4,062 victims as murdered or abducted during the Battle of Hue. International observers and historians have estimated the true death toll may be between 3,000 and 6,000 people. That represents between 2 and 4% of Hue's population. Imagine a city of 100,000 losing 3,000 to 6,000 civilians to systematic execution in less than a month. The communists initially denied the massacre. Then, When the evidence became overwhelming, they claimed the victims were killed by American bombs or artillery, but the bodies told a different story. Hands bound with wire, gags in mouths, single bullet wounds to the back of the head. No shrapnel wounds. These were executions, not combat casualties. Captured documents boasted of the killings. One document marked absolute secret stated, "We eliminated 1,892 administrative personnel, 38 policemen, 790 tyrants, 6 captains, 2 first lieutenants, 20 second lieutenants." Radio Hanoi broadcast on April 26, 1968. Those killed were hooligan lackeys who had incurred blood debts of the Hue compatriots and who were annihilated by the front's armed forces. Years later, some communist officials acknowledged what happened, though they tried to minimize their responsibility. Truong Hu Tang, who served as justice minister in the Provisional Revolutionary Government, later wrote, "Large numbers of people had been executed. Our fanatical young soldiers had indiscriminately shot people." Historian Ben Kiernan has called the Hue massacre possibly the largest atrocity of the entire Vietnam War. Why did this happen? The communists had been planning this for months. The lists, the targeting, the systematic nature of the killings. This was not spontaneous violence. This was policy. The communist leadership believed that eliminating potential opposition was essential to consolidating control. They believed that the South Vietnamese government was held together by a network of officials, and if you killed enough of those officials, the government would collapse. They were also sending a message. This is what happens to those who collaborate with the Americans and the Saigon government. It was meant to terrify the population into submission. And perhaps most chillingly, there is evidence that some of the killings were carried out by local Viet Cong sympathizers settling personal scores. The revolution provided an opportunity to eliminate business rivals, unfriendly neighbors, former lovers, anyone you had a grudge against. All you had to do was tell the cadres that person was a government spy or a reactionary. The Hue massacre remains one of the most controversial and painful legacies of the Vietnam War. For decades, it was politically inconvenient. Anti-war activists did not want to discuss communist atrocities because it complicated the narrative of American aggression. Supporters of the war tried to use the massacre as justification, which made it a propaganda tool rather than a genuine reckoning with what happened. But the dead deserve to be remembered. The men and women and children who were marched to their deaths deserve to have their story told. They were victims of a brutal ideology that saw human beings as expendable in the pursuit of political power. Let me tell you about some of the men who fought in this battle, because alongside the horror and tragedy, there were acts of extraordinary courage, moments when ordinary human beings rose to meet impossible challenges. Brigadier General Ngo Quang Truong. I have mentioned him several times, but let me tell you more. Truong was 39 years old when the battle began, commanding the 1st ARVN Division. He was widely regarded as the finest combat commander in the South Vietnamese military. American officers who worked with him were unanimous in their praise. When the offensive began, Truong was at his headquarters with a skeleton staff. Most of his division was on Tet leave. He had maybe 500 men immediately available, and they were surrounded by thousands of enemy troops. Any reasonable person would have assumed the headquarters would fall within hours. But Truong held. For 26 days his compound remained unconquered. He personally directed the defense, moving from position to position, encouraging his troops, making tactical decisions under fire. He coordinated with American forces, with ARVN reinforcements, with anyone who could help. He never panicked. He never lost his composure. Lieutenant General Robert Cushman, the senior Marine commander, later said, "Truong survived with the enemy all around him. They never took his command post. He was surrounded, cut off, under constant attack, and he held. That takes extraordinary leadership." General Creighton Abrams personally recommended Truong for promotion after the battle. The victory at Hue earned Truong his 2nd star. He would go on to command Uac Corps, the entire northern region of South Vietnam, until the fall of Saigon in 1975. After the war, he fled Vietnam and eventually settled in the United States, where he died in exile in 1995. He remains one of the most respected military figures in Vietnamese American communities. Lieutenant Colonel Ernest Cheatham, the man who figured out how to fight in cities. Cheatham's tactical innovations saved countless Marine lives. By studying manuals, thinking creatively, and adapting on the fly, he turned 2nd Battalion, 5th Marines into an effective urban warfare unit. His Marines loved him because he asked nothing of them that he would not do himself. He was at the front lines constantly, evaluating how tactics were working, making adjustments, encouraging his men. When other officers wanted to carpet bomb the city and flatten everything, Cheatham argued for precision and fire discipline. He knew that every building destroyed was a Vietnamese family's home. He tried to minimize civilian casualties even while prosecuting a brutal battle. Cheatham was awarded the Navy Cross, the second highest decoration for valor in the U.S. military. His citation reads in part, Colonel I. Cheatham's dynamic and heroic leadership and his unflagging example inspired all who observed him and contributed greatly to the defeat of the enemy. After the war, Cheatham continued to serve in the Marine Corps, retiring as a colonel. He spent his later years speaking about the battle, teaching the lessons of urban warfare to new generations of Marines. He died in 2007, remembered as one of the finest combat officers of his generation, Gunnery Sergeant John L. Canley. When Captain Batchelor went down on January 31st, Gunny Canley took over. For the next 7 days, he led Company A, 1st Battalion, 1st Marines, through the most intense urban fighting of the battle. He was everywhere, leading from the front, inspiring by example. On January 31st, while the company was pinned down by fire, Canley repeatedly exposed himself to carry wounded Marines to safety. He crossed fire-swept ground multiple times, often under direct observation by enemy snipers, to reach injured men and drag them back. On February 4th, during the assault on the hospital, Canley scaled an 8-foot wall twice, in full view of enemy positions, to pull wounded Marines to safety. He was not hit somehow, though bullets were striking the wall around him. On February 6th, when his company was attacking a fortified enemy position, Canley led the assault personally, charging across open ground, firing his rifle, rallying his men to follow. The position was taken. Throughout the week, Canley seemed invincible. Marines said he never ducked. He moved through fire as if he were taking a stroll. His physical presence, his calmness under fire, his absolute confidence, it gave his Marines courage. Canley was originally awarded the Navy Cross in 1970 for his actions, but his Marines believed he deserved more. For 15 years, they campaigned to have his award upgraded to the Medal of Honor. They wrote letters, they lobbied politicians, they gathered witness statements. Finally, in 2018, 50 years after the battle, the upgrade was approved. On October 17, 2018, 80-year-old John Canley received the Medal of Honor from President Trump in a White House ceremony. He became the 300th Medal of Honor recipient in Marine Corps history. When asked about the honor, Canley said, "It is not about me. It is about the Marines who did not get the appropriate recognition when we got home. It is about all of them." John Canley died on May 11, 2022, at the age of 84. His funeral at Arlington National Cemetery was attended by hundreds of Marines, young and old, paying respects to a legend, Sergeant Alfredo Cantu Gonzalez, known as Freddie to his fellow Marines, 21 years old when he died at Joan of Arc High School on February 4th. For 5 days, from January 31st to February 4th, Gonzalez performed acts of heroism that his commanding officers said they had never seen equaled. He maneuvered his squad through enemy fire to clear sniper positions. He assaulted machine gun bunkers with grenades. He carried wounded Marines to safety while under fire. He refused medical evacuation twice when wounded, staying with his men. On February 3rd, he single-handedly knocked out an enemy rocket position that was pinning down his platoon. On February 4th, at the high school, he used a light anti-tank weapon to destroy multiple enemy positions. He kept fighting even after being seriously wounded. He only stopped when he was shot multiple times and could no longer stand. His commanding officer, First Lieutenant Scott Nelson, later said, "When we entered the fight in Hue, Gonzalez was a good Marine, but in those days he became way more than that. He became almost a one-man army. For the next few days, there was nothing he would not do. All of us who survived remain in awe of him." Sergeant Alfredo Gonzalez was posthumously awarded the Medal of Honor. The guided missile destroyer USS Gonzalez, DDG-66, was commissioned in his honor in 1996. At the commissioning ceremony, his sister said, "My brother loved the Marine Corps. He loved his fellow Marines. He gave his life protecting them. I hope this ship protects sailors the way my brother protected his Marines." These are just 3 of the heroes of Hue. There were hundreds more. Marines who charged machine gun nests, corpsmen who ran through fire to reach wounded men, tankers who stayed in burning vehicles to provide covering fire, ARVN soldiers who fought to defend their city, Vietnamese Marines who assaulted the Imperial Palace, civilians who hid American and South Vietnamese soldiers from the communists, old women who guided Marines through safe routes, young boys who carried messages between isolated units. Every single person who was there has a story. Every survivor carries memories of friends who did not make it home. Every family in Hue lost someone, to the fighting, to the executions, to disease and starvation during the siege. This battle changed everyone it touched. Let me give you the final accounting. The cost of the Battle of Hue, American casualties, Marines, 142 to 147 killed, 857 to 1,100 wounded. Some units suffered close to 50% casualties. 2nd Battalion, 5th Marines, and 1st Battalion, 1st Marines, were combat ineffective by the end, requiring wholesale replacement and reorganization. Army, 74 killed, 507 wounded. The 1st Cavalry Division bore most of these losses in operations around the city. Total, American, 216 to 221 killed, 1,364 to 1,607 wounded. ARVN casualties, 333 to 452, killed 1,773 to 2,123 wounded, 30 missing. NVA and Viet Cong, between 2,500 and 5,133 killed within the city. Another estimated 3,000 killed in fighting outside the city, as they tried to reinforce a retreat. 89 captured. Most of the captured were wounded and unable to escape. The communist forces committed approximately 8,000 to 12,000 troops to the battle. Based on casualty figures, they lost between 50 and 75% of their force. The 4th, 5th, and 6th NVA regiments were effectively destroyed as combat units. It would take months to rebuild them. Civilians, 844 killed in the fighting, 1,900 wounded, and as we discussed, between 2,800 and 6,000 executed by communist forces, 116,000 made homeless, over 80% of the city's population. Families that fled during the battle returned to find their homes destroyed, their possessions looted, their neighborhoods in ruins. The physical destruction. More than half of Hue was destroyed. Of the 160 major structures in the Imperial City complex, only 10 remain largely intact. The rest were damaged or destroyed. Centuries of Vietnamese cultural heritage reduced to rubble. The Citadel walls bore the scars of thousands of artillery impacts. The Imperial Palace was damaged, though not as badly as feared. The Purple Forbidden City, the innermost sanctum, was mostly spared because both sides avoided heavy weapons used there. South of the river, entire neighborhoods ceased to exist. The street grid remained, but the buildings were gone. Rubble and ash marked where homes and shops once stood. All the bridges had been damaged or destroyed. The hospital was a ruin. Schools were collapsed. The university was wrecked. The economic impact was catastrophic. Hue had been a commercial center, and now there was no commerce. Markets were destroyed, shops were looted, warehouses were burned. The port facilities were damaged. The roads were cratered. It would take years to rebuild. But the battle had strategic consequences far beyond Hue itself. The Tet Offensive, of which Hue was the longest and most dramatic battle, was a military defeat for the communists. They failed to spark the general uprising they expected. They failed to hold any of the cities they captured. They suffered enormous casualties, probably 50,000 dead, across all of South Vietnam. The Viet Cong were gutted. They never fully recovered. The NVA had to take over most combat operations for the rest of the war. But Tet was a psychological victory for the communists. It shattered the American public's confidence in the war effort. For months, the Johnson administration had been telling Americans that the war was being won, that the enemy was weakening, that there was light at the end of the tunnel. Then, suddenly, the enemy launched coordinated attacks across the entire country, seized the American embassy in Saigon, if only briefly, and held Hue for nearly a month. American television broadcast footage from Hue every night. Viewers saw Marines taking casualties, fighting house to house. They saw the imperial palace in ruins. They saw refugees fleeing with everything they owned on their backs. They saw the images of destruction, and they asked, if we are winning, why does it look like this? On February 27, 1968, CBS News anchor Walter Cronkite, often called the most trusted man in America, broadcast a special report from Vietnam. He had visited Hue during the fighting. He had seen the destruction firsthand. In his editorial at the end of the report, Cronkite said, "To say that we are closer to victory today is to believe, in the face of the evidence, the optimists who have been wrong in the past. To suggest we are on the edge of defeat is to yield to unreasonable pessimism. To say that we are mired in stalemate seems the only realistic, yet unsatisfactory conclusion." He recommended that the U.S. negotiate a settlement and withdraw. President Lyndon Johnson reportedly watched the broadcast and said, "If I have lost Cronkite, I have lost Middle America." Public opinion polling showed the impact. Before Tet, Americans were evenly divided on whether the war was a mistake. By April, those who thought it was a mistake outnumbered supporters by 8 points. 78% of Americans believed the U.S. was not making progress in the war. Johnson's approval rating for his handling of the war dropped to 26%. On March 31, 1968, President Johnson addressed the nation. He announced a partial bombing halt. He announced he would seek negotiations with North Vietnam. And then, stunning everyone, he announced, "I shall not seek and I will not accept the nomination of my party for another term as your president." The Battle of Hue had helped bring down a presidency. Conclusion: what Hue taught us. The Battle of Hue became the most studied urban battle in U.S. military history. It exposed critical gaps in training, doctrine, and equipment. It taught lessons that would influence how America prepares for and fights urban warfare for the next 50 years. Lesson 1. Urban combat requires specialized training. After Hue, the Marine Corps established dedicated urban warfare training facilities. At Quantico, Virginia, they built a mock city modeled on Hue to train Marines in military operations in urban terrain, MOUT in military jargon. Every Marine now receives at least basic urban warfare training. Lesson 2. Combined arms are essential. Infantry cannot succeed in cities without armor, engineers, artillery, and air support all working together. The killer teams of tanks and ontos that Cheatham developed became standard doctrine. Lesson 3. Intelligence. Preparation of the battlefield is critical. The Marines went into Hue with inadequate intelligence. They did not know how many enemy they faced. They did not have good maps. They did not know the terrain. This cost lives. Modern urban operations now require extensive intelligence gathering, satellite imagery, signals intelligence, human intelligence from locals, drone surveillance. Lesson 4. Rules of engagement must balance military necessity with protection of civilians and cultural sites. The initial restrictions on heavy weapons use in Hue may have increased Marine casualties, but unrestricted use of artillery and air power would have destroyed the entire city. Finding the right balance is critical. Lesson 5. Logistics matter enormously. Resupplying units in urban combat is difficult and dangerous. Evacuating wounded is difficult and dangerous. Communications are degraded by buildings. Command and control is compromised. All of this must be planned for in advance. Lesson 6. Urban combat is slow. The expectation that the Marines would clear Hue in days was fantasy. Urban combat takes time. Progress is measured in buildings, not kilometers. Patience is required. Lesson 7. Urban combat is costly. The Marines suffered nearly 50% casualties in infantry units at Hue. This is not abnormal for urban warfare. It is brutal, attritional fighting at close range. Units must be prepared for high casualty rates and have replacement plans ready. These lessons were applied in subsequent conflicts. In Panama in 1989, in Somalia in 1993, in Iraq in 2003, 2004, and 2007. The Second Battle of Fallujah in November 2004 was the heaviest urban combat U.S. forces had experienced since Hue. Marine commanders studied Hue extensively before the Fallujah operation. They applied many of the same tactics: combined arms teams, aggressive use of firepower, gas to clear buildings, patient, methodical clearing operations. But Hue teaches us something beyond military tactics. It teaches us about the cost of war on civilians. The people of Hue did not ask for this battle. They were caught between two forces, both of whom claimed to be fighting for Vietnam's future. Their city was destroyed. Their families were killed. Their lives were shattered. The massacre of civilians by communist forces was unconscionable. It reveals the brutality that ideological fanaticism can inspire. But we must also acknowledge that American and ARVN firepower killed civilians too. When you drop 500-pound bombs on a densely populated city, civilians die. When artillery shells rain down, civilians die. War is indiscriminate in its destruction. For the survivors of Hue, the battle is not ancient history. It is living memory. Families still search for relatives who disappeared during those 26 days. Mass graves are still occasionally discovered during construction projects. The trauma has been passed down through generations. But there is also resilience. Hue was rebuilt. The damage to the imperial city has been repaired, painstakingly over decades. UNESCO designated it a World Heritage Site in 1993, recognizing its importance to global cultural heritage. Tourists from around the world now visit to admire the architecture, to walk the walls of the Citadel, to visit the tombs of the emperors. The physical scars have healed more than the psychological ones. But healing does happen. For the Marines and soldiers who fought there, Hue remains a defining experience. Many have returned to visit, walking the streets where they fought, trying to reconcile their memories with the peaceful city they find. Some have met with former NVA soldiers, finding common ground in shared sacrifice and mutual respect for each other's courage. War is hell. Sherman said it first, but it was never more true than in Hue. But even in hell, human beings are capable of extraordinary acts of courage, compassion, and sacrifice. The Marines who charged into enemy fire to save wounded comrades, the corpsmen who exposed themselves repeatedly to treat the injured, the tank crews who stayed in burning vehicles to provide cover, the ARVN soldiers who fought for their city, the civilians who hid strangers in their homes. All of these people, in the worst of circumstances, showed us the best of humanity. That ultimately is what we should remember about the Battle of Hue. Not just the tactics and the strategies, not just the casualties and the destruction, but the human dimension, the courage and the cowardice, the nobility and the brutality, the sacrifice and the suffering. On February 24th, 1968, a South Vietnamese soldier climbed the 120-foot flag tower in the Citadel. He carried with him the gold and red flag of the Republic of Vietnam. He tore down the communist banner that had flown there for 25 days and raised his nation's flag. Marines and ARVN soldiers throughout the city saw it go up and cheered. Some wept. After 26 days of hell, after losing friends and comrades, after seeing horrors that would haunt them for the rest of their lives, they had won. But as one Marine later said, "We won the battle, but looking at the ruined city, at the bodies, at the homeless civilians, at the destruction all around us, it did not feel like victory. It felt like survival." That is the Battle of Hue. 26 days in hell, a city destroyed and rebuilt, thousands dead, and lessons learned in blood that remain relevant today. The flag flies over Hue once more. The city lives. The story endures. Never forget what happened there. Never forget the price that was paid. Never forget the courage that was shown. Never forget Hue. Now, let me take you deeper into some of the specific engagements that made up this larger battle. Because Hue was not one battle. It was dozens, hundreds of individual fights, each with its own drama, its own heroes, its own cost. The fight for the Treasury building on February 4th deserves more attention. This was not just another building. This was a fortress. 3 stories of reinforced concrete, thick walls, small windows. Commanding position overlooking several key streets. The NVA had turned it into the anchor of their defensive lines south of the river. Fox Company, 2nd Battalion, 5th Marines approached from multiple directions. 1st Platoon came from the east, 2nd Platoon from the north, 3rd Platoon held in reserve. As 2nd Platoon tried to cross the wide boulevard in front of the Treasury, they were hit by interlocking fire from 3 directions. The Treasury itself, Leloir Elementary School to the left, and a row of 2-story buildings to the right. Lieutenant Michael McNeil, commanding 2nd Platoon, later described it. It was the most intense fire I had ever experienced. I have been in firefights in the jungle where you take casualties. But this was different. This was aimed. This was deliberate. They could see us. Every time someone moved, they shot at him specifically. It was not random fire. It was targeted killing. The platoon went to ground. Men hugged the earth behind whatever cover they could find. Trees, curbs, a low wall, a destroyed car. Corpsman Michael Perkins crawled from man to man, treating wounds, while bullets kicked up dirt around him. He was hit 3 times, in the arm, the shoulder, the leg, but he kept working until he passed out from blood loss. Lance Corporal Richard Carter, the man with a 3.5-inch rocket launcher, was behind a stone wall. He loaded a rocket, stood up to take aim, and a B-40 rocket-propelled grenade hit the wall 3 feet from his head. The explosion was like being inside a thunderclap. Carter was thrown backward, landing hard on the street. His loader, Private David Johnson, was killed instantly, shrapnel tearing through his chest and throat. Carter's ears were ringing. Blood was pouring from his nose. He could not hear anything except a high-pitched whine, but he could see Marines pinned down, dying. He picked up his launcher, loaded another rocket by himself, a 2-man job done solo with shaking hands, and fired at the Treasury's iron gate. The rocket punched through, blowing the gate off its hinges. 1st Platoon used that opening to advance. They poured through the gate, taking fire from windows above. Staff Sergeant Robert Smith led his squad up the exterior staircase, throwing grenades ahead of them, clearing each landing before advancing. On the 2nd floor, they ran into an NVA platoon in a hallway. Close quarters battle, 10 feet apart, rifles and grenades. Smith killed 3 NVA with his M16 before taking a round in the leg. He kept fighting, firing from a kneeling position until the hallway was secure. Now the tanks moved in. 2 M48s positioned themselves directly in front of the Treasury and Yeen started pumping 90mm rounds into the building. Each impact shook the ground. Walls cracked, ceilings collapsed. The NVA inside were being pounded by high explosive shells detonating in enclosed spaces. The overpressure alone was lethal. Eardrums ruptured, internal organs damaged, men killed without a mark on them. The Ontos added its firepower. 6 106mm recoilless rifles, fired in sequence, walking fire up the face of the building. The backblast from these weapons was tremendous, a jet of flame and pressure shooting backward 40 feet. Anyone standing behind an Ontos when it fired would be killed. The crews knew this. They cleared areas behind them before firing. But the effect on the target was devastating. Entire sections of wall blew inward. Then came the gas. The E-8 gunners moved forward and started firing CS grenades through every opening they could find. Windows, the blown gate, holes in walls, 64 grenades in volleys of 4. The gas poured into the building, filling rooms, seeping through cracks, rising up stairwells. CS gas is heavier than air, so it sinks, filling lower levels first, then rising. NVA soldiers started emerging. Some came out coughing, hands raised. Others tried to fight, shooting as they ran and were cut down. Still others tried to flee out the back and ran into 3rd Platoon, which had moved around to cut off escape routes. The basement was the last stronghold. A group of NVA had retreated to a vault, thinking the thick walls would protect them from the gas. They were wrong. CS gas seeps through any opening. The Marines threw grenades into the vault. When the explosion stopped, they entered and found 24 bodies. By late afternoon, the Treasury building was secure. Fox Company counted their casualties. 10 killed, 23 wounded, over 1/3 of the company. but they had eliminated over 100 NVA soldiers and broken the communist defensive line. The fight for the provincial hospital on February 5th presents a different kind of horror. This was a large complex of buildings surrounded by a wall. The NVA had turned it into a fortress, using patients as human shields. When hotel company approached, they could see civilians in windows, waving desperately. Were they hostages? Were they willing shields? Were they NVA in civilian clothes? The Marines could not tell. Captain Ron Christmas, commanding hotel company, made a difficult decision. He would not use heavy weapons on the hospital. No tank fire, no recoilless rifles, minimal grenades. They would have to take it by assault, accepting higher casualties to minimize civilian deaths. The company approached the hospital walls. Enemy fire came from windows, from the roof, from the gate. Private First Class Michael O'Brien, a machine gunner, set up his M60 to provide covering fire. He fired 800 rounds in 20 minutes, keeping enemy heads down, while his squad mates advanced. The barrel of his machine. Gun glowed red hot. When it finally jammed from overheating, O'Brien grabbed an M16 from a wounded Marine and kept fighting. Marines blew a hole in the wall with C4 explosive and poured through. They fought through the buildings room by room. In the wards, they found wounded ARVN soldiers who had been executed in their beds, shot or bayoneted. Doctors and nurses who tried to intervene had been killed. One doctor, a Vietnamese physician named Dr. Le Van Hao, had been tortured before being executed. Multiple knife wounds, broken fingers, and finally a bullet to the head. In one room, Marines found 6 NVA soldiers dressed in hospital gowns, pretending to be patients. When challenged, they grabbed weapons hidden under beds and opened fire. The Marines killed all 6 in a close-range firefight that shredded the room with bullet holes. The hospital was finally secured by evening. But the condition of the facility was appalling. No power, no water, wounded people, both military and civilian, lying in filth. The stench was unbearable. Dead bodies had been left where they fell, some for days. Medical supplies had been looted. Equipment was destroyed. The hospital was no longer functional as a medical facility. It was barely better than an open field. Hotel company established a defensive perimeter and tried to provide what aid they could. Corpsmen worked through the night, treating civilians and enemy wounded alongside their own casualties. Captain Christmas later said, "That was the day I understood what this war was really costing. Not just soldiers dying, but a whole society being torn apart. The hospital should have been neutral ground. Instead, it was a battlefield. What kind of war makes battlefields out of hospitals?" The fight for the prison was mercifully shorter, but no less significant. On February 1st, the Viet Cong had seized the prison and released all the inmates. Many were common criminals. Some were political prisoners, and a substantial number were Viet Cong who had been captured in previous operations. The VC prisoners were immediately rearmed and put into the battle. The common criminals were simply told to create chaos, which they did enthusiastically. When Gulf Company assaulted the prison on February 7th, they expected heavy resistance. What they found was abandonment. The NVA had pulled back, consolidating their positions. The prison was empty except for bodies. In the courtyard, they found the bodies of prison guards who had been executed, shot in the back of the head while kneeling. In one cell block, they found the bodies of prisoners who had apparently refused to join the communists. They had been locked in their cells and left to starve or die of thirst. The Marines secured the prison without a fight, but what they found there haunted them. This was evidence of systematic execution, of cold-blooded murder. These were not combat casualties. These were war crimes. Now, let me tell you about the final assault on the Imperial Palace, because this is where Vietnamese and American forces came together in the climax of the battle. By February 24th, the NVA had been pushed back to the southwestern corner of the Citadel and the Imperial Palace grounds. They held perhaps 1/4 of the Citadel, maybe less. Their supply lines were cut. Their casualties were mounting. Reinforcements could not get through. They were fighting a losing battle, but they were fighting stubbornly, making the Americans and ARVN pay for every meter of ground. The Imperial Palace is a complex of buildings surrounded by a high wall. The Forbidden City within it is the innermost compound where the emperors lived. This is sacred ground to the Vietnamese. To destroy it would be to destroy a piece of Vietnamese identity. Both sides understood this. The Americans tried to minimize damage. The NVA tried to use this restraint against them. The assault on the palace was given to the ARVN, specifically the Vietnamese Marines and the 3rd ARVN Regiment. This was a political decision. The South Vietnamese government wanted its own forces to be the ones who liberated this symbolic location. But it was also a practical decision. The Vietnamese Marines were exceptional troops, among the best in the ARVN, and they were fresh, having just arrived to relieve exhausted American units. The Vietnamese Marines approached the palace walls on February 23rd. They used the same tactics the Americans had developed: combined arms, tear gas, careful fire discipline. But they also used their intimate knowledge of Vietnamese architecture and culture. They knew where the weak points were. They knew which gates could be breached. They knew the layout because this was their heritage. The fighting was intense. The NVA defended every gate, every courtyard, every building. But the Vietnamese Marines were fighting for something more than military objectives. They were fighting for their history, their culture, their national identity. A Vietnamese Marine sergeant named Nguyen Van Tan later said, "When I saw the palace walls, I was not thinking about tactics or strategy. I was thinking about my grandfather, who brought me here as a child. He told me about the emperors, about our history. I was not going to let the communists destroy that." The Vietnamese Marines took the outer walls on February 23rd. They fought through the night, clearing buildings, securing positions. By dawn on February 24th, they had pushed into the imperial city itself. And at midday on February 24th, soldiers of the 212 Company, 3rd ARVN Regiment, reached the flag tower. The moment they tore down the communist banner and raised the South Vietnamese flag was captured by photographers and television cameras. The image went around the world. For the South Vietnamese, it was a moment of triumph, of vindication. For the Americans, it was relief. For the North Vietnamese watching from their remaining positions, it was the end. But the fighting was not quite over. Small pockets of NVA resistance remained, dug into bunkers and buildings. The 4th Vietnamese Marine Battalion launched a final assault on February 25th at 3 in the morning. This was a night attack, inspired by the success of Major Thompson's night attack earlier in the battle. The Vietnamese Marines hit from multiple directions, using darkness for cover, overwhelming the exhausted and demoralized NVA defenders. By dawn, organized resistance had collapsed. The surviving NVA soldiers retreated through the western gates and fled into the countryside. Some were pursued and killed, others escaped. The Battle of Hue was over. I need to tell you about the wounded, because in any discussion of casualties, we tend to focus on those killed. But for every man killed, 3 or 4 were wounded, and their stories deserve to be told. Medical evacuation in Hue was a nightmare. In most of Vietnam, when someone was wounded, you called for a medevac helicopter. Dust-off, they called it. The chopper would land, load the wounded, and have them in a field hospital within 30 minutes. Many men survived wounds that would have been fatal in previous wars because of this rapid evacuation. But in Hue, helicopters could not land in most places. The weather was too bad, the ceilings too low, and even when weather permitted, the landing zones were under fire. Helicopter pilots tried anyway. They came in under fire, took hits, got wounded men out. Several helicopters were shot down making medevac runs. Pilots and crew chiefs were killed trying to save wounded Marines and soldiers. When helicopters could not get in, the wounded had to be carried to the river, then loaded on boats, then transported downriver to where helicopters could land. This could take hours. Men bled out waiting. Men went into shock from pain and exposure to cold rain. Men died who might have survived with faster evacuation. Corpsmen, Navy medical personnel attached to Marine units, were the unsung heroes of Hue. They ran through fire to reach wounded men. They treated casualties under direct enemy fire. They stayed with the wounded when they should have taken cover. The casualty rate among corpsmen was higher than among riflemen because they constantly exposed themselves. Corpsman David Forrest treated over 30 wounded Marines during the battle. He was hit twice by shrapnel, but refused evacuation. On February 6th, he was treating a wounded Marine in a building when an NVA soldier appeared in the doorway. Forrest was unarmed. Corpsman carried no weapons, only medical supplies. The NVA soldier raised his rifle. The wounded Marine, though barely conscious, grabbed his .45 pistol and shot the NVA soldier, saving Forrest's life. Forrest finished treating him, then carried him to safety on his back. Both men survived. The types of wounds suffered in urban combat were different from jungle fighting. In the jungle, most casualties came from booby traps, ambushes, and mortar fire. In Hue, casualties came from direct fire at close range, gunshot wounds to the head and chest, shrapnel wounds from grenades and B-40 rockets exploding in confined spaces, burns from flamethrowers and white phosphorus grenades, crush injuries from collapsing buildings. The corpsmen had to deal with all of it. They learned to treat sucking chest wounds by sealing them with plastic wrappers from field dressings. They learned to stop arterial bleeding by clamping arteries with forceps. They learned to give morphine for pain, carefully marking dosages on the wounded man's forehead with a grease pencil so the next medical person would know how much had been given. They learned to prioritize, triage, who could be saved, who was too far gone, who could wait. These were terrible decisions to make, and corpsmen had to make them multiple times a day. At the aid stations, Navy doctors and ARVN medical personnel worked under primitive conditions: no proper operating rooms, limited supplies, constant interruptions from incoming fire. They performed surgery by flashlight when the power was out. They reused bandages when they ran out of clean ones. They improvised everything. Dr. James Finnegan, a Navy doctor at the MACV compound, later said, "I trained in a modern hospital. I thought I understood trauma medicine. I was not prepared for Hue. The volume of casualties, the severity of wounds, the conditions we worked under, nothing prepared me for that. I did things I never thought I would do. I made decisions I never thought I would have to make, and I live with those decisions still." Some of the wounded were evacuated to hospital ships offshore, or to major hospitals in Da Nang. They received better care there, but the journey was risky. Wounded men died en route from complications, from shock, from blood loss that could not be controlled in a moving vehicle or boat. And then there were the psychological wounds, invisible but no less real. Combat stress, shell shock. What we now call post-traumatic stress disorder. Men who had been in continuous combat for weeks without rest, watching friends die, killing at close range, living in constant fear. Some broke, some refused to fight anymore. Some just sat and stared at nothing. Unit commanders tried to identify these men and get them out, but there were not enough replacements, so men kept fighting even when they were psychologically shattered. After the battle, psychiatric casualties were significant. Depression, anxiety, nightmares, flashbacks, substance abuse. Some Marines could not readjust to civilian life when they got home. Some could not hold jobs. Some ended up homeless. Some committed suicide years later. The battle took them, even if the bullets did not. The dead present their own tragedy. 216 to 221 Americans killed. 400 plus ARVN killed. Between 2,500 and 5,133 enemy killed. 844 civilians killed in the fighting. Thousands more civilians executed. Every one of those numbers represents a person, a life cut short, a family destroyed, dreams unfulfilled, potential unrealized. The American dead were brought back to Phu Bai, then to Da Nang, then flown home. They were buried with full military honors. Their families received folded flags and heartfelt condolences. Some received medals posthumously. All were mourned. The ARVN dead were buried in military cemeteries in Vietnam. Their families held traditional Buddhist or Catholic funerals. They grieved according to their customs, but unlike American families, they did not have the comfort of distance. The war continued around them. They buried their sons and husbands and then went on living in a war zone. The enemy dead were left where they fell initially. Later, burial details collected the bodies, or what remained of them after artillery and bombs had done their work. Some were buried in mass graves, some were never identified, some were simply left to decompose, especially those in hard-to-reach areas. The smell of death hung over Hue for months after the battle. The civilian dead were the most tragic. They died in their homes, in the streets, trying to flee, trying to help wounded soldiers, trying to protect their children. They died by accident and by design. They died because they were in the wrong place at the wrong time. They died because someone decided they were enemies of the revolution. They died young and old, healthy and sick. innocent and guilty of nothing more than being Vietnamese in a war over what Vietnam should be. Families in Hue still search for relatives who disappeared during the battle, still hope to find remains so they can have a proper burial, still wonder whether their loved one died quickly or suffered, still carry the pain of not knowing. The Battle of Hue cast a long shadow over the remainder of the Vietnam War and beyond. Its impact was felt militarily, politically, psychologically, and culturally. Militarily, the immediate impact was the destruction of 3 NVA regiments as effective combat units. The 4th, 5th, and 6th regiments had to be rebuilt from scratch. This took months. During that time, other NVA units had to take over their operational areas, spreading forces thin. The North Vietnamese High Command was shaken by the casualties. They had expected losses, but not on this scale. The Viet Cong were essentially destroyed as a military force during Tet overall, and Hue contributed to this. The local VC guerrilla units that participated in the attack were wiped out. The political infrastructure that had taken years to build was exposed and dismantled. The VC would never recover. From mid-1968 onward, the war was fought primarily by regular NVA units rather than Southern guerrillas. But the Communists achieved their psychological objectives. Tet demonstrated that no place in South Vietnam was safe. If the enemy could seize Hue for nearly a month, if they could attack the American embassy in Saigon, if they could launch coordinated strikes across the country, then clearly they were not the beaten force that American commanders claimed. American public opinion turned decisively against the war after Tet and Hue. The television footage was devastating. Americans watching the evening news saw Marines taking casualties, fighting house to house. They saw the destruction. They saw refugees. They saw body bags. And they asked, what are we accomplishing? Is this worth it? Can we win this? The anti-war movement, which had been growing but was still a minority position, gained mainstream credibility. Suddenly, it was not just hippies and radicals protesting. It was suburban moms, business executives, veterans, respected journalists. The consensus supporting the war crumbled. Within the U.S. military, Hue sparked serious debates about doctrine and training. The Marines had been unprepared for sustained urban combat. This was a failure of institutional imagination. The assumption had been that the war would be fought in jungles and rice paddies, not in cities. After Hue, that assumption was questioned. The Army and Marine Corps both established urban warfare training centers. They developed new doctrine for military operations in urban terrain. They experimented with new weapons and tactics specifically for city fighting. The institutional knowledge gained at Hue was codified and passed on. But the larger question was strategic. Should the U.S. be fighting this war at all? Hue seemed to prove that no amount of American firepower could pacify Vietnam. The enemy would simply retreat to sanctuaries in Cambodia and Laos, rebuild and attack again. And the cost, in American lives, in money, in domestic political stability, was becoming unsustainable. President Johnson's announcement that he would not seek re-election was a direct consequence of Tet and Hue. He recognized that he had lost the American people. His successor, Richard Nixon, would campaign on a platform of peace with honor, promising to end American involvement while not abandoning South Vietnam. This would lead to Vietnamization, the policy of training and equipping the ARVN to take over the fighting while gradually withdrawing American forces. But Vietnamization was fatally flawed. The ARVN, despite having some excellent units, was never capable of defeating the NVA without American support. When Nixon finally withdrew U.S. forces and cut off aid, the ARVN collapsed in the face of the 1975 Spring Offensive. Saigon fell on April 30th, 1975. South Vietnam ceased to exist. Would the outcome have been different without Tet and Hue? Possibly. If American public opinion had remained supportive, if political will had held, the U.S. might have continued fighting indefinitely. But that is speculation. What we know is that Hue, more than any other single battle, demonstrated the costs of the war and turned American opinion against it. For the Vietnamese people, both North and South, Hue became a symbol of the war's brutality, the city's destruction, the civilian casualties, the massacre. It showed that neither side was willing to spare civilian lives to achieve military objectives. It showed that ancient cultural treasures could be reduced to rubble in the service of ideology. It showed that Vietnam was being destroyed in the name of saving it. The trauma of Hue affected Vietnamese society for generations. Families torn apart. A generation of young men killed. A city destroyed. The psychological scars ran deep. Even today, survivors of the battle struggle with memories. PTSD was not just an American affliction. Vietnamese on both sides suffered it too, though they lacked the resources to treat it. For American veterans of the battle, Hue became a defining experience. Many kept in touch over the decades, forming bonds that transcended rank or unit. They held reunions. They returned to Vietnam to visit the battlefields. Some met with former NVA soldiers, finding that their former enemies understood what they had been through in ways that civilians never could. These reunions often involved mixed emotions: pride in having done their duty, sorrow for lost friends, anger at the government that sent them there, and the society that rejected them when they came home. Confusion about what it all meant. Was the sacrifice worth it? Did they accomplish anything? These questions haunt many veterans still. The historical debate over Hue continues. Some historians argue it was a decisive American and South Vietnamese victory that crippled the communist military forces. Others argue it was a Pyrrhic victory, won at such cost that it undermined support for the war. Still others focus on the massacre of civilians as the most important aspect, seeing it as evidence of communist brutality that has been insufficiently acknowledged. All of these perspectives have merit. Hue was militarily successful for the US and ARVN. It was strategically successful for the communists, and it was catastrophically tragic for the civilians caught in the middle. Perhaps the most important lesson is the simplest. War is hell, and urban warfare is the worst kind of hell. Cities magnify all the horrors of war. Civilians cannot escape. Cultural treasures cannot be protected. The fighting is close, personal, brutal. Progress is slow. Casualties are high, and the destruction is total. When American forces went into Iraq in 2003, when they fought in Fallujah in 2004, when they battled in Sadr City and Ramadi and Mosul, the ghost of Hue was present. Commanders studied the battle. Tactics were adapted from lessons learned there. The same questions arose: how do you take a city without destroying it? How do you defeat the enemy without killing civilians? How do you maintain public support when the fighting drags on and the casualties mount? We still do not have good answers to these questions. Hue taught us what not to do, but it did not provide easy solutions. Urban warfare remains the most difficult challenge in modern military operations. The ancient city of Hue stands today, rebuilt and restored. The imperial palace has been repaired. The citadel walls have been reconstructed. The scars are mostly gone, visible only to those who know where to look. Tourists from around the world visit, marveling at the architecture, learning about Vietnamese history, perhaps not realizing that they are walking through a battlefield where thousands died. The perfume river still flows. The tombs of the emperors still line its banks. The city lives, and in that survival, there is hope. That humanity can recover from even the worst devastation. That peace can follow war. That life goes on. But we must never forget what happened there. Never forget the price. Never forget the courage and the sacrifice. Never forget the civilians who died. Never forget the lessons learned in blood. The Battle of Hue, 56 years ago now, remains relevant. As long as wars are fought in cities, as long as ideologies clash, as long as nations compete for power, the lessons of Hue matter. Remember Hue. Remember the warriors who fought there. Remember the innocents who died there. Remember that war, especially urban war, destroys more than buildings and armies. It destroys societies, cultures, and lives. And pray that we never have to learn these lessons again.